for? Have you met
These things have names and names in them. Well, it was all filtered last week, 2 weeks ago, man. I think they get it unfiltered. They don't know how to filter part of stuff on, like. All right, folks. Formally welcome everyone to the Social Development Committee this morning. We're formally open as we're quorate. Just move swiftly on to the agenda. We have apologies from Sammy Wilson, Michael Copeland and Jim Allister. Any other apologies to record? Nothing. So then we move on then to the draft minutes, item number 2. It's on page 5 of your pack, and page 3 also of your tabled items. It's just we have a slight change on the 5th paragraph of the 3rd page. And this is just it had been indicated in the original draft minutes that we would write to the department on the barriers to the housing executive having a borrowing facility. The department has actually agreed to present the committee with a more detailed response to this in the next phase of the programme, which will deal with options for social housing, and the new draft is reflected. So our members content just to agree to that amendment. I get our members are content to agree to that amendment.
Agreed.
Okay, so move on. Thanks very much. That's the number 3. Item number 3, chairperson's business. There is none to report. Moving on then to 4 matters arising. You will recall that last week we had referred to last meeting we had dealt with the Simon community, had invited the committee to hold a meeting at one of their sites around the issue of homelessness. We've also received a letter, a request from Chris Little, MLA, for the committee to hear from Youth Speak. Again, that's on page 9 of your tabled items. And Youth Speak are currently campaigning on housing and homelessness issues that affect young people in particular. You'd also be aware of the Homelessness Monitor Northern Ireland, a report published by Crisis and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So it was my recollection that the committee had agreed that we would try to have a meeting on site with the Simon community, have a committee meeting on site with having suitable facilities and so on. So if members are content, we can just formalise that agreement, and then we could sort of do around a broader discussion involving the request from Chris Little and taking on board the monitoring report as well. So remember, happy enough that we still proceeded as we had initially agreed, but just with those additional caveats. Okay, thank you. And this could likely be the 26th of June meeting. All right. Yep. Okay. So because there's no briefing schedule for that day. All right, so members can move on then to the next matters arising, and that's, as you recall, the meeting scheduled for the 22nd of May has been rescheduled to the Monday the 19th of May, and we're just trying to get some sense of when people actually are available for that on the day. It's going to be, it's a plenary day, and our best guess at this moment, because a number of members have indicated they're doing meetings in the morning, party meetings and other business related to the Assembly. So what we're going to suggest is if we could pencil in the meeting for, say, 1:30, with the view to give ourselves enough flexibility even to move it to 2 o'clock, because we don't want to run on too long, but we'll deal in primarily with probably statutory rules on the day. So it won't be a lengthy meeting, and if we could kind of agree, we will have a meeting, we'll try for 1:30. It won't be long, but it may be just depending on scheduling, and if we leave it to Kevin and others here just to try to tic-tac with members, perhaps even on the morning. Yes, Gregory.
I take all questions or 2 that day as normal.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm not sure.
I would imagine they are.
Well, I imagine that.
So, no, sort of stab in the dark here, but we would take it up to start at 1:30 and finish by 2 then, if that's the case.
Yeah. And it might be, I don't know where you could even say like 1:15 or so, but if we could just tag with members in advance just to try to make sure we maximise the numbers available. Okay. And there'd be no surprises on the agenda, so it's just to try to get the maximum number of people available to attend to conduct the business. Okay, thanks members for that. Again, then we discussed there last week the housing conference, which was scheduled for the 12th of June, which a number of members are speaking at, including the Minister and myself and other members of the Assembly. But I think I thought the members agreed that we would defer the no committee meeting because it's on a committee day, you'll enable members to attend that conference because it's viewed at being maybe a pretty important conference. So I just wanted to confirm if members had actually had that view that we would defer that meeting scheduled for that day just to enable people to attend the conference, given the kind of importance of the conference and the wide range of discussion involved. All right, so take that as agreement then. So that's the way we'll proceed then for the 12th of June. Thank you, members, again for that. On page 10 of your tabled items, there's a letter from the BBC Litigation Department, and that's their letter responding to the committee's request to give oral evidence in respect of the committee's inquiry. You'll see it's an extensive legal letter setting out the reason why they feel it's inappropriate for him to attend the committee. And it is a lengthy meeting, or rather a letter. It kind of relies heavily on legal arguments. I mean, I'm suggesting that members could discuss this as a more substantive item at our meeting next week. What I would suggest is if members had a mind to challenge this at this moment in time, it probably would be sensible then to take legal advice, because obviously if we're going to challenge, and it'd be my own sense, you probably have to deal with the legal arguments in the first instance. So if that is the case, then we would need to take legal advice here from Assembly Legal Services, and then we'd need to commission that. So the earlier we do that, the better. I'm just kind of flagging that up because Gregory, go ahead.
Yeah, I know obviously we need a more fully attended meeting, hopefully, to discuss this, but I'm not speaking for any of the absentees. But I would imagine, given the history of this, that people would want to challenge this. Is there any way of trying to speed it up by going ahead to get our own legal opinion on this letter in advance of next week's meeting? Because, I can see this dragging out as everything else is dragged out. And if we can even speed it up by a week, because this, I mean, I've had a look at this, and as I think all of us expected, this is going to be like against teeth here, and we're going to be dragging this. Let's get on with it.
Members contend then we would seek legal advice in respect of the BBC response, and we'll ask the Assembly Legal Service to provide that as quickly as possible. I tend to agree. I don't think there's enough members here just to really flesh it out in the type of detail that people may want. Okay, so thanks members again for. We have in page 14 of your tabled items, we have the department latest business plan. And the department wishes to hear the committee's views on this plan before it's published. So are we content then that we schedule a briefing from the department on the business plan and schedule that in the forward work programme? Members happy enough for that?
Yeah.
Okay, members, thanks very much for that. Then we move into the committee inquiry session then. So I just want to refer you to the additional pack that you received from Tuesday, which relates solely to the committee's inquiry, and a big folder here. There were also briefing papers which were sent out in the regular pack last week. So this morning we have two evidence sessions. The first one is scheduled with the Department of Social Development, and I draw your attention to page 13 of your pack. The following officials are here to give evidence as part of phase 2 of the committee's inquiry. So we have Will Hare, Permanent Secretary, and Jim Wilkinson, Director of Housing, and to formally invite both yourself, Will and Jim, to the committee inquiry this morning. And I suppose, obviously, what we're dealing with here will understand the term of the inquiry for phase 2, and just remind people it's on tab 1. Really just remind ourselves what we're doing, and really the particular term of reference for this particular phase 2 is the adequacy of actions proposed by the Minister, DSD and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to address previous well-documented failings in relation to procurement and contract management. So that's the specific criteria that we're actually relating to. So on that basis, without any further ado, as I said, members have received quite extensive body of documentation. I want to thank the officials for providing that for us, and will guide us through any elements that we're unsure of, or draw our attention quickly to anything that we're struggling with, given the volume of material. So without any further ado then, well, can I just invite yourself then and Jim just to maybe take us through the briefing that you want to present to the committee this morning?
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to this phase 2, just like to briefly outline to you what steps the department has taken to address the previous well-documented failings in relation to procurement and contract management since 2010. From the spring of 2010, there were a growing number of concerns in relation to housing executive governance and contract management regimes, which we were picking up. And the then Minister, Alex Atwood, commissioned in October 2010 a review of governance in the housing executive. And that followed a series of internal and external investigations into the housing executive, which raised concerns that its governance systems were not sufficiently robust. So, the Minister having commissioned that, I as Permanent Secretary asked my senior internal auditor to lead a team to examine and report on the governance structures, the controls and skills of the organisation. And in addition, external specialist assistance was secured through CPD and Department of Finance and Personnel for a gateway review on the procedures for letting and managing the Egan contracts. And I set up an oversight panel with independent membership, which reported to by the audit review team on an ongoing basis to oversee that governance review. It was completed in December, and both it and the review group, the gateway review, were published in January 2011. I then, and that was a very fundamental review, and actually a lot of the work, for example, that came in the NIAO's report, in a sense, is based very much on the work that we had commissioned and dealt with in that process. A number of oversight arrangements were then put in place to ensure that the recommendations of that review were appropriately implemented. Once more, I had an oversight implementation group, which I chaired, cross-departmental, but also with independent membership, and the group met regularly with the housing executive. The acting chief executive at that time attended the meetings and reported to me on that. I also held meetings with the chairman, vice chairman and chief executive in April 2011 to discuss some of the key strategic issues, which included the gateway review, and my minister, Alex Atwood, also had on performance meetings, review meetings with the chair and chief executive in February 2011 and May 2011. Then, of course, with the election in May 2011, Minister McCausland also expressed his concerns about the issue of contract management, both on being briefed in coming into government, but also on the issues leading to the termination of the Red Sky contracts in July 2011. In light of his continuing concerns, he asked for a forensic investigation to be carried out on a sample of housing executive maintenance contracts to provide him with assurance in relation to other contracts, the quality of service to tenants and the proper use of public funds. The subsequent findings and the evidence the ASM report was published in June 2013 and demonstrated there were considerable issues and shortcomings in relation to the management of response maintenance contracts. So we had that process. We were going ahead and getting the contract issues. I, however, still harboured concerns in relation to the effective implementation of the recommendations of my 2010 governance review in relation to management contracts. I was concerned that the housing executive was not making full use of its internal assurance regimes to improve contract management. So I wrote to the chief executive and the chairman between January and May 2012 about contract management arrangements, expressing my serious concerns and the implementation. I increased my accountability meetings from twice yearly to quarterly, and advised that the meetings would be with the accounting officers, and involving myself and the chief executive of the housing executive and not with the chairman. However, I also instructed my senior internal auditor to conduct an independent review of the actions taken by the housing executive to implement those particular recommendations. That was completed in July 2012, and the opinion of my review team was that there had not been sufficient pressure in 2011 they had to resolve some of the issues in the draft reports from the repairs inspection unit. Spending so much time in debating the methodology used in producing the reports, the Housing Executive had not focused on the significant findings of the reports, and that was a key focus. In July 2012, the Minister introduced special accountability measures, which took account of the recommendations of our internal audit review and was to enhance significantly the oversight arrangements between the Department and the Housing Executive. We increased the accountability meetings from quarterly to monthly, and at those meetings, the issues relating to the management contracts were and still are regularly taken as agenda items, and I get progress reports on the work being taken there. And also I look at the Audit Office Priority 1 recommendations from their reports to those charged with governance. In September 2013, I instigated a further governance review to check up where we had got on the recommendations of the review, the 2010 review, the special accountability measures, and also the ASM recommendations. I also looked at the lessons learned from the Housing Executive in respect to the management response maintenance and the extent which that had been pushed into their looking at planned maintenance. That report concluded there is still a considerable amount of work ahead for the Housing Executive if they would see through the necessary structural and cultural changes to ensure the lessons learned from response maintenance were applied. Good progress has been made in implementing the actions of the 2012 work programme. However, there's still work to be completed. That was forwarded to the present Chair of the Housing Executive, and he has come back in March 2014 with a report about where the Housing Executives see that work and a commitment to see that work completed. At the present time, I ramped up, as you've seen, because of these pressures, I've ramped up governance to make sure that I have oversight of these issues. And now, however, I think there is being progress made in the Housing Executive. You're going to hear about where we've gotten some of these issues going forward. Now I'm taking stock on looking at what's the right and appropriate level, because one of the issues which I have also decided to do is I have an inspection team independently that looks at the delivery of landlord services in the housing associations, and I've said and I have recruited staff, and I will have a similar service provided to the Housing Executive, an independent that will look, a professional team that will look at that issue and landlord and land services. But that I want to make sure that I also, however, adjust the accountability regime to make sure it is not overly bureaucratic, that it gets the right focus at this time, because I do see significant progress from the board and the senior management of the Housing Executive. They are addressing these issues. I think we've got a journey to go, but I see positive signs of movement in these issues, and I'm really keen to work with the team in the appropriate way to make progress. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Can I just ask, it's probably a couple of very, very simple questions actually from me at the outset. In terms of the 2010 review, that you referred to, it was said then that the arrangement between the Department and the Housing Executive, the structures were in place, but they weren't maybe used as effectively as they might have been. And then with the additional measures put in, how can we get assurance that there is a substantive improvement and that those structures and the additional structures will in fact work?
The 2010 review, I think a key element of it is emphasising that there was not the information flow within the Housing Executive from the front line, as it were, up to through their audit committees and to their board was not being effective. The board was not being on site on some key issues in that process. I think there has been a significant shift in the organisation of how the Housing Executive has organised its work, its governance processes. It has gone through very thoroughly its delegations and process and structures. Its board has been looked at its work and had effectiveness reviews in that processes. Its Audit Committee has moved on significantly in its structure and organisation, which I think is very key, and I have an observer in that committee, and I get a sense that there's been significant movement. So I've had those levels of assurance around that. I've also had internal reviews, my own oversight arrangements in 2012 11, 12 by my internal audit, which, and I have, as I've described to you, I have ramped up accountability regimes to make sure I get the information flows, and I will adjust that rightly when I get to the right level in that process. I've had, as I described, my senior auditor go in and check against these issues. So I've gone and tested where these processes are taking place, and he is telling me that while not every recommendation has been fully completed, there has been significant progress in that area. So I think we are seeing a significant change in process. But what comes, of course, across in all this issue, which I think has been recognised in the 2010 report, but other issues, processes here, a lot of this comes down to culture and organisation. And I see now an organisation which I think is very much addressing that issue of culture and organisation itself, and its Journey to Excellence work, which the Acting Chief Executive is leading that process. I think is very much about trying to work to that to improve the entire process, which that then leads into more effective governance. I mean, I think that's the main issue. Jim, would you?
Yes, I mean, I suppose from the sponsor division as well, which is a key role to play, very much one of the findings of the 2010 review was that you need to make sure that you don't just rely on assurance statements that are coming forward, but you probe and test those assurance arrangements. And I think the processes and procedure Will has laid out in terms of monthly monitoring, the monthly meetings, that is about testing assurances, about probing progress, and in addition to that, at a sort of very technical level, our management statement and financial memorandum has been reviewed to take on course best practice. We regularly monitor Audit Committee reports, but we also receive the repairs inspection unit reports, the assurance reports and the internal audit reports, so that we're able to monitor and test progress is being made and indeed that issues are being addressed. So very much I see our sponsorship role over the last number of years being very much a proactive sponsorship role, engaging heavily with the executive as we move forward. And I think one of the things I'm very keen to take forward is in terms of looking at how we take forward the inspection process into the landlord idea, to as well as test and probe, but to test the levels of assurances and get some in-depth expertise on the landlord element.
Okay, and just second from myself before we move on to members then. In terms of the PAC report, I think in 2013, March 2013, I mean, they had expressed concerns about, obviously there were to be investigations into plant maintenance, contract management and so on, but those concerns suggested there may need to be investigations into further items of the business.
Yeah.
Have any of those other investigations actually been carried out, and if so, has there been anything thrown up from those investigations?
The other issues, I suppose, and I mean, actually, these are issues come to my regular reports, are issues like heating and land, ground maintenance, etc. And process. These are being dealt with by internal audit within the housing executive. I mean, there's now a focused structure of organisation, so that we are looking at the reports that are coming out, and we get the reports, and I think those reports there's work being done on heating,
Heating plant.
Yeah.
So really the issue for
Procurement and
yes, the issue for report was really that two things. First of all, they want to make sure that there was a clear line of sight between the department in relation to things like whistleblowing and fraud, and we can make sure all issues are investigated, and we have systems in place and regular checks on that. In addition, we want to make sure that, and this is part of the audit report, was that the Audit Committee adopted a proactive planned approach, which had a particular focus on areas that might be deemed to be sort of risk-based. So the Audit Committee, the audit team this year from the Housing Executive has been explicitly looking at a series of higher areas such as plant maintenance, lifts, grounds, etc., and we monitor progress on those reports.
okay, thank you. From Khan.
Chair, there's just a couple of questions that I wanted to ask them, and I've always tried to get my head around what the connection is, where the control was. Obviously, the overall control of housing lies with the Minister. And then there must be some connection there between the department and the housing executive and the overall running of the thing. They're seen probably as an arm's length body with their own board, but because it's a public body, there has to be political control at the thing. Could you just give us a wee rundown of where that is?
Yeah, well, the structure, and we've set out, I mean, in our memorandum, we set out in the first section of that the formal structure of that issue, and I mean, sorry, it's quite an elaborate structure process, but in broad terms, I mean, it's the overall direction issues of the policy direction issues obviously lie with with the Minister and priorities and the issue about the budget, which obviously received from the Assembly. And I suppose what, for example, as this year, the Minister will formally write to the Chair and say, here are my understanding of my priorities. In putting your operational plans together, here, understand you need to reflect the programme for government targets and the various systems which we, the Assembly, have done. So at high level, the Minister sets those issues out. We then have, it is obviously for the Board of the Housing Executive, working with its senior management to set out its business and operating plan and its process at how it's going to expend those money. In certain areas, obviously, we said there are certain areas, supported people living, amount of money we're able, the Assembly is able to give in relation to the Social Housing Development Programme, which the Housing Executive operates on our behalf. There's certain very clear targets and issues which are set out in that process, and they will set out their plans in that process. That then, it is for the Housing Executive to set that programme up and to run that programme. There are performance meetings that take place between the Minister and the Chairman, and the Deputy Chairman will come as well. There are 2 of those formally each year. I also have accountability meetings with the accounting officer at all times to make sure that all issues are being dealt with that all issues are being addressed, that the budget is being used, that we are alert to any issues that are coming up, that issues such as we've described here are being dealt with effectively with the organisation. And those meetings take place regularly. At the same time, Jim and his team in the Housing Division will be having, at an official level, a range of meetings on different programme levels in those issues, and likewise they will be reporting back to me if there's issues that they're of concern to themselves that need to be escalated, and then I'll bring it up with the Chief Executive if appropriate. Generally issues are well resolved by the team in that person. So that's the government regime, and I say it is set out in the memorandum. It is a classic governance regime for an NDBB in the process, and it's trying to differentiate between what clearly is the governance role of the department/minister, differentiate that from the key responsibility of the board and the board and the staff of the housing executive for the day-to-day operation and the process of the issues. And we're trying, obviously, not to confuse the issues so that people are clear in their respective roles.
Right, well, can I just remind people that the memorandum that was referred to is on tab 2.
I understand that, sir.
Yeah.
I understand that. And sometimes when you read them, it doesn't give you the whole.
No, I'm just saying that.
I hope that gives you some sort of a global sort of an overview of what is a complex structure about it.
And I'd say that the reason I asked that question was I still can't, and there obviously over this past number of years there has been serious questions raised about the management and governance within the housing executive.
Yeah.
And that I have no doubt that people have put their minds together to try and to get the bottom of this problem. But what I can't understand is that even go back and just taking it from 2010, because there was obviously problems before that, why the department not only did not detect it, but did not act on the problems going back at that time. And to me that shows that there was not only a problem within the housing executive, but also within the department itself, at whatever level that could have moved in this much sooner.
Yeah.
And I do not think that there should have been a review of the department also on how they handled this whole thing.
Okay. I mean, and I discussed this obviously with the Public Accounts Committee in some sense at the time, but I mean, obviously I can't speak before I arrived in 2010, so I can't in that process in that way. I think what our governance review showed, in broad terms, the governance review of 2010, was that there was not information that the issues that were happening at the operational level of the housing executive in relation to various contracts, that was not filtering up through the senior structures of the housing executive and reaching the board, right? We were getting assurances basically from the senior staff of the housing executive, but in a sense the material in which they were basing was not, their flow of information was not right within the housing executive. Now, as I said to the Public Accounts Committee, I think what we have, what I've learned from this is, I mean, and you come back to the issue and say, yes, why was that not known? And I would also argue, interestingly enough, if you look in the late, from 2012 2005 onwards, there's NIA reports, for example, on good examples of any NDBB governance. And in fact, the Housing Executive is seen very much at that time as a good example of good structures and governance. What I think I learned from that process is you have to, as a department, not just take things on the surface. You have to every now and then go down and test drill into the systems to make sure that the information that is flowing from the organisation is correct. You have to go yourselves and test that process. And that wasn't happening before. I can't explain why it wasn't happening, but that's the lesson I learned in that process. And that's what we do every now and then. I don't want to, it's not my job to do the work which Mags and her team are very ably doing, but my job is every now and then on your behalf, in a sense, to go and test to make sure that we are actually getting the information that we can be assured that the flow is correct.
Was that done in 2010?
That, in 2010 was the 2010 is when we first of all, in the sense that the 2010 review is when we do that for the first time and we see the weaknesses.
And was action taken right away to
Absolutely. There was a significant number of recommendations came out of that process, 16 critical ones and 75 good practice ones, and we've now looked at 2/3 of those have been completely reviewed. Some have not been reviewed. I mean, you look at them because there's good reasons why they haven't entirely been completed, but they've been moved on. So there has been a significant shift across that process, and I think we are, it's a journey in this process of getting all these things right. A lot of it's about getting the quality, the culture in organisation, the openness of organisation, and those are bits of work, I think, that is some of that is still to be completed, but I think good progress has been made.
Well, I accept that that you came on the scene in 2010 in terms of social development, but when you were looking at the governance and the housing executive, were you also looking at the governance within the department before 2010 to find out where there may have been difficulties or problems and how the whole thing was monitored?
As I've said before, I think there were issues there that I have increased the formality and structure of the various within the department and the record keeping within that structure. And we've improved that in our process. And I would say that sometimes I think there was some processes before I think were, my impression was that some of them were slightly more informal than I think they should have been, and that's why I formalised the process in that way. But I think that was only one. I'd say the significant issue was the information coming out of the housing executive. I think was the major problem. And
you'd mentioned Red Sky and the whole thing earlier on, and the problems that arose there. And I know certainly within my own constituency there was multiple complaints that had been made by local residents, by residents associations, and by about the level of the work that was going on within that thing. And I think at one stage the housing executive, I actually know that the MP for the area had made representations to the minister then.
Yes.
I think that may have been Alec Atwood.
I think it was
Margaret Ritchie.
It would have been Margaret Ritchie before, if I remember.
It might have been Margaret Ritchie back, but it was an SDLP minister at the time anyway, and raising serious concerns over the problems and asked for action to be taken. And I think even to the extent that I believe that the housing executive were taking a court case against Red Sky that was stopped dead on its tracks. Now, many people ask for why that had happened. Well, I'm trying to find out, was that a decision that was purely taken by the housing executive, or at that time was there departmental involvement in advising that the thing should be dropped?
I think the PAC report deals quite extensively with that issue, and I think it articulates in particular the reason why the housing executive took the decision not to proceed.
Yeah, but when that may be well and good. You could probably go to many PAC issues, and what I'm asking you is, on your knowledge, was it a housing executive decision or was it a departmental decision? To advise them not to.
I think that was back to 2000, if I remember, 2008 or something in prison. So it was before my time on the scene, and therefore I'm trying to remember the records of the PA. So my impression was it was a decision within the housing executive, but I would say there is a record there that will actually show. I think it may have been explored at the time. The key point I'd make, ever since By the time I arrived in 2010, already the investigations were taking place into Red Sky, and I must admit, certainly as a department, we were very strong in making sure that that work, which the Audit Office had brought to us, either being whistleblower, brought that to the attention of the Housing Executive in 4, and the department was working with the Audit Office and the to make sure that that issue was fully investigated. And that led to a number of investigations, which ultimately led to the decision of the Housing Executive Board to terminate the Red Sky contract.
And to just move the thing way forward, where are we now in a position in relation to contracts?
Right. This, I mean, maybe Mags and her team probably are best placed to issue, but the answer is I think we've now obviously response maintenance is well in place and delivering at this time and being looked at in that process. It's and we're seeing significant progress in the quality of that issue. Though a tight and new structured contract, I think, has thrown up its own challenges, and there's always that question of getting the right balance in that process. And I think there is a Gateway 5 into that, which I think the Housing Executive is just about complete. I have not a final report on that issue. That'll tell us where that one is. On plan maintenance, I believe that the contracts are just about being let at the moment, but once again, Mags will be able to tell you more detail on that.
Okay, for now. Gregory?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. The overall sort of work, it seems to me there's been quite a bit of work being done in terms of reviewing progress that's been made. But and it's very important that be done, obviously. But looking at the departmental position now vis-a-vis the overall review of the Housing Executive as a body, what work is being done to ensure that correcting whatever mistakes there were in the past isn't leading to a point where you get an organisation that is much improved, and possibly in a short period of time, apart from correcting past mistakes, you'll get to a point where a decision is taken about the overall body itself, and then is there a lot of that work then that will be transferable, or what emphasis has been placed on the elephant in the room, if you like?
Yes.
Maybe say, we briefed the committee recently on the social housing reform programme, which is looking at all the structures, and it's being taken forward on the basis of possible change, no change, massive change. But what we can say is that we're looking very closely at all regimes. So whatever this pans out, there will be an important governance regime between a department and its NDPB, whatever the functions of that NDPB may be. Similarly, we briefed the committee that we're looking very critically at governance and inspection, and we referred to that as governance and inspection of housing associations. But as well as described, we're very keen on ensuring that the key elements of what we look at when we're inspecting a housing association as a social landlord, we will take forward into the agenda we're working now with the Housing Executive in terms of looking at their landlord function. So I think what I would say is that any good practice will not be lost, plus anything that emerges as better practice as an exploration of the social housing reform programme will either be brought in to the now or certainly in the future.
Okay. Well, you'd said about the Red Sky issue, and I think Fran McCann mentioned it as well, that the Minister at that stage, or I wasn't quite sure the timeline that you'd indicated, then said that the issue might need to be looked at in a wider context. When was that?
That was in 2011. There was work to check out. It was checking out whether the quality of work in other related contracts by other contractors undertaken by SM, and that was taken forward in 2011.
It was commissioned in October 2011, but the Minister indicated his intention in July 11.
Yeah.
Right. But what was the indication that the Minister had indicated?
The Minister had indicated in July 11 that he wanted a similar investigation that had been carried out in Red Sky to be carried out in other contractors to assure themselves that the issues that were relevant in that contract weren't appearing elsewhere in other contracts.
Yeah. So how wide, between July and October then, Minister taking that decision, how widespread internally within the department and the housing executive would that knowledge have been at senior level, that was the departmental direction, if you like?
That would have been the housing executive senior management team and chair would have been advised that that was going to be taking place. But I mean, in addition to that, I think it's something that we always stress in the audit office in the Parliament, the Audit Commission, the PAC stressed as well, was the housing executive had a very, very extensive internal inspection regime operating at that place across all contracts. One of the issues was that that inspection process was showing up concerns across a whole raft of contracts and a whole raft of areas, and that it was very important. And this is one of the issues that was raised, that by the time we got to May 2012, while the ASM report was still ongoing, there was concerns that those reports, which were internal housing executive reports from their own inspection teams, weren't being cleared as quickly as possible, weren't being given due course of attention. So it's not as if all the work was in one basket. There was a basket of work which was ASM commissioned, PAC were carrying out their own ongoing investigations, and at the same time the housing executive's internal inspection regime were producing their reports, which was looking at all the areas.
Yeah, but I just want to be absolutely clear what you're saying. Between July and October 2011, at senior housing executive level, I presume it had to have been the case that they were aware of the Minister's decision to widen out beyond Red Sky, that type of investigation.
Yeah.
So would it be accurate to say at a senior level within DSD, at a senior level within the housing executive, there was knowledge that that was the case?
Yes.
Right. And that was before the BBC Spotlight programme began their investigations into Red Sky?
I'm not sure when they began their investigation.
Well, they I think, at an earlier point had indicated there were 6 months at the programme. And the programme was broadcast in the summer of 2013. So by process of elimination, you could probably work out that they began their investigations November, December of 2012, which was more than a year after it appears, from what you're saying, senior people within both the department and the housing executive were aware of the Minister's decision to replicate the Red Sky type of check to other contractors.
Just been advised that in November 2012 the BBC started writing to the Minister.
Yeah.
Which is November 2012, yeah?
Yeah, and that's more than a year after.
Yes.
Senior people both within the department and the housing executive knew that it was not confined to Red Sky. Okay, thanks.
Really?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Taking into account the information you've given us on the steps taken to address the weaknesses in the planned maintenance contracts, would you expect the Auditor General's report to reflect that? Because I've given qualified opinions in the last 2 years. I suppose the second question is around what is now appears to be the mythical £18 million. Do we know where that stands at the moment? Are you in a position to give us any information on that?
Just on the first part, clearly the Audit General will want to. His concern obviously is to work out about planned maintenance, but also about any questions of overpayments and other issues. So clearly the question is a certain time to reconcile accounts in that process. Now I understand the work has been that there has been a conclusion or coming towards a conclusion of that negotiation. The key question is the Audit General want to be satisfied about whatever is the financial outcome of that, and whether that is achieved this year and he is satisfied with the system this year. It depends. That work is being done by the housing executive. They will have to work with the auditor, the NIAO, to see whether he is that they have been able to sort all issues out and account for all their money in that process. We still are waiting a final documentation from the housing sector because we have to get we have to do formal clearance of any settlements, and that has to, it comes to the Department of Finance and Personnel, right, likely has to do that process. That is still, we are still waiting this final documentation from us. And in that issue, obviously, we are still waiting the issue about, we have not received the formal documentation from the Housing Executive on their conclusion of the negotiation on that issue. So,
Are you hopeful that'll happen soon? Because we've been told that this is reaching its conclusion over the past few months, that it's going to happen next week and the week after. And the week after.
well, we, like ourselves, we've been monitoring that
Is
issue.
there any particular reason for the delay, or?
I think it would be best to ask my Housing Executive colleagues who have been dealing with that issue. Best place to explain to you.
I think the overall problem certainly for I'd be trying to come and get an understanding of us would be that obviously we're getting reports from yourselves again here this morning, and I do appreciate you giving us a very substantial memorandum, which is going to have to take us a bit of time to absorb on that. But there's a lot of work that's been done there, of course, and a lot of work being done, and you're giving us a kind of fairly good, clean bill of health, so to speak, with a lot of work to be done yet. And,
Yes.
and again, I want to make that point in a second. So even as late as 2014, you're saying there's still a lot of work yet to be done. But the issue around the 18 million, and I appreciate we can't go into any more detail on that, but it could appear, in my mind, it looms large as a major fly in the ointment, because on the one hand we've been told a lot of progress has been made, but that's still sticking out as an unresolved matter. And until we get the result of that and the conclusions from that, it's hard to draw a judgment. So it is there somewhere along to be dealt with.
Absolutely, it's a massive issue. And I mean, it's for yourself and for ourselves. We have to kind of work that through. What's that what we all learn in that process. And obviously, it was very much an issue which the Audit Office itself has been focusing on, because the 18 million is an issue. It's been major, rightly a major concern. This is public money, so how do we make sure this is correctly accounted for?
Okay, Mick, is that you?
Yep.
Sure, to come in, so I'll bring it back in again for
Okay, Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hare, for your this morning, and for bringing us up to date in a sense of where the department is in its relationship with the Housing Executive. Given the history of where we are and how we've got to where we are today, how can we and the public and the tenants of the Housing Executive be assured that the information which you're receiving is now accurate and correct and timely?
Well, I think the key element, as I say, we've been putting in regular, reports into the system. I put 2 major reviews into the organisation, which have test drilled down, and I say the one which was done last year comes back and gives while progress is still to be made, is saying significant progress has been made. My staff are much more confident in the material here. I think the other issue is, of course, it says the Audit Office itself it is a clear and major focus on part of the Audit Office, who is the external auditors for us all and for the Assembly. And they likewise are going into this process as well. So that's another form of internal intervention. But I think I think we see I take a confidence from the board and from the senior management of the Housing Executive, who are very much recognise these issues, very openly say these are issues they see they're dealing with, and have clearly set out the fact that this is how they're dealing with it. So I think that openness and direction that I sense from the team is something I think should give to tenants and the public a sense that there is a clear will and focus to try and deal with issues in that process. And you obviously will have the opportunity to inquire further about those issues. So I think those are the issues. But I do not doubt, for all of us, the last years have been a tough period in housing. I think we all recognise that issue, and we have to work through. These have been very difficult issues. In essence, here we had some governance problems. When in 2010, when we went in, these major response maintenance, basically we had the wrong type of contracts, and the administration of that and the skilling of that was not right. And that has taken us time, and the Housing Executive to get that right. The same issues were in planned maintenance as well. So these are the very big expenditures, and you have to get the staff trained, and there's been a lot of work done on staff training. a lot of getting the right contracts in place, and those are tough contracts to negotiate. Get those processes in place and the changes is a major operation, and that has taken time. And clearly it is difficult to explain to people why it takes 18 months to put a new contract in and to embed it in. So we have a lot of work, housing executive and to make sure that people can get a sense that there is a quality contract. But you know, I have an opportunity to talk to the senior management today. I hear from them. I see very clearly a team that's very committed to that issue and are very much doing that work.
That's helpful and reassuring. Thank you.
All right, sure, thank you. Rob, you looking back in?
Sure, it was just a couple of things, because a lot of hinges around the Egan contracts also. Would it maybe be accepted that the Egan contracts were not the right concept of contracts to be introduced? Because there was, and I remember going back to the time they were being introduced, the argument was that when you bring in a system that asks for more for less in terms of monetary value, that you're always throwing up problems, that there was always going to be a system where people would come in low and then argue over additions to it that caused the problem. Do you think that's where the problem? And again, I think in the Price Waterhouse report and some of the other reports, it talks about that the level of training that went on at the time led to some of the serious problems that there was.
I mean, I readily admit I'm not an expert on managing response management. You've got people like Jerry Flynn who will be much better to give you a description. I mean, my reading of the issue was that in a sense in the Egan contracts, the reports that we've had, and it's a number of reports have made this one, it's inherent in the ASM work. I think it builds a Campbell to Kell makes the point that in a sense there were good aspects of the Egan concept where you're trying to get away from long-term past adversarial contract issues to getting a slightly more partnership process. The partnering process was very strongly accepted in the housing executive, but there wasn't an effective balance in the process. It went too far in that way. They had to get a sort of different balance in the process, and they've now got better indicators and contracts that can be better negotiated in the process. But a lot of it is about the skills, as you say, of the staff. I've seen some people arguing that maybe the housing executive at the time when it put in Egan contracts gave up too many of its technical staff, so it didn't have enough people who had a real technical ability then to negotiate the issues in the process. And I understand now they're going to use consultants and other process to make sure they have that technical skill on their side. So I think Jerry will probably give you a much better sense of those issues, but it is overall, may I say, I think that there has been those contracts have produced some quite significant savings in something to the public purse. So there's a broader picture to look at that issue, but getting these right, getting this sort of contracts right, and building the commercial expertise in the public sector to do these sort of contracts well, I think is a big lesson. And may I say it's a lesson if you read across any literature in government. I think all Dublin, London, it's a difficult area of public sector issue, and where we have to get our skill base right to do this.
Sure, well, just one final point, and it's only 18 million. I know you keep referring that back to the housing executive. I know that it was the chair of the housing executive, as the minister said, provided him with the information on the overcharging, as he said, of 18 million. And but as Mickey said, we keep getting told that we're almost there, but it seems to be a never-ending dip. That we would you accept? Would the department accept that in terms of the 18 million, that it's nowhere near that? And that
We can't. We really can't go into that because we don't have the.
Raise the number of times here, John.
Yeah, but you're asking for a specific answer because we don't have the formal conclusion of the agreement between or the investigation. So I think the point for me, obviously, the key thing is we have expected this matter to have been resolved much sooner, because we can't satisfy ourselves that the matters are resolved until we get something like that dealt with in their way and work out what actually happened or where it went wrong, if it went wrong, and all of that. So I take your point. I share your frustration, but at this moment in time, we don't have confirmation that the matter is agreed, finally resolved, so we can't ask the official.
Your judgment.
Yeah. Thanks for that. All right. So, okay, I don't know other members wanting to ask anything else at the moment. Well, could I thank yourself or Jim, or if you don't have anything else to add to that at the moment, I mean, appreciate that. As I say, I want to thank you for that memorandum you have provided. But clearly, these matters are still ongoing, so you appreciate, given the volume of work, we have still got take time to absorb all of this and taking further evidence, and at least the next one from the Housing Executive themselves. And obviously, we may want to come back to you to get further
Of course.
advice or support or explanations. Is that fair enough?
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Good morning. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, then moving on then to the next item, which is the evidence session with the Housing Executive. And could have formally then invite Meg's body. Meg's here, yeah. For the first time. Megs is the interim Chief Executive. Could I formally welcome you, Megs, here for the first time to the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Siobhan Macaulay is Director of Regional Services, and Jerry Flynn, Director of Housing and Regeneration. Could I formally welcome the baby here this morning. I suppose, I mean, you've been kind of sitting in on the last section there, so you have a flavour of where people are at. At the end of the day, we have a term of reference which is guiding this particular phase of our inquiry, which is really to address the adequacy of, or to satisfy ourselves around the adequacy of actions proposed by the Minister of the DSD and the Housing Executive to address previous well-documented failings in relation to procurement and contract management. And obviously, I suppose it's best summarised that this is ongoing work. What obviously the committee inquiry has to do is to try to satisfy itself on where the measures are taken to address the previously identified failings adequate, are they appropriate, are they in hand, are they working, are they effective, and we are being told by the department that there's significant progress but still a lot of work to be done. So without any further ado, could I just invite yourselves then to present to the committee your own view on all of this.
Thank you, Chairman, for the invite along this morning and to update you on the issues outlined. You'll have received a briefing, and I'll just use that by way of presentation to yourself to go into a wee bit more detail in some of those issues. Mag's light body, and it is my first time along to Social Development Committee, and I hope to be back next week to share in a wee bit more detail our Journey to Excellence work, which was touched on by my colleague. I joined the Housing Executive as Director of Transformation just in November of last year, and as of 1st of April, Acting Chief Executive. You may know my colleagues, Jerry Flynn, who Director of Landlord Services, previously Director of Housing and Regeneration, and Siobhan Macaulay, Director of Regional Services, former Director of Design and Property. As this committee will be aware, over recent years, both the Housing Executives Board and senior management team's overarching priority has been to implement a host of measures to address the well-documented failings and legacy issues that have prevailed since 2010 around contract management and also procurement. As my colleague has outlined, and the memorandum goes into some detail from DSD, you'll know there have been an array of internal and external reviews carried out, both around governance and contract procurement, dating from 2013 through to last year. We also receive an annual report from the Controller and Auditor General to those charged with governance, and I'd want to touch on that in a wee bit detail today. On all of those investigations, audits, reviews, etc., we've accepted the recommendations from each and spent time as a senior team working through our board and governance arrangements to develop improvement plans that really went into the detail of those and make sure they were embedded in the organisation by way of learning. From our perspective, and I think covered with Social Development Committee before, running through those reports, we can summarise the failings round about the culture of the organisation, our ability to manage the type of contracts we were involved in, the structures and their suitability to deliver and manage appropriately, and both skills and knowledge around about governance and contracts. For myself, since taking up post at 1st of April, I've been out and about with staff across our organisation, getting a handle on where our staff are, to help to move the organisation forward, the job that I was first recruited for, and now my job in leading the organisation. I've probably met over that short time about 2,500 of our 3,500 staff, and really trying to get clear with our staff who are the key resource of the organisation, where the housing executive needs to be. I think as members in the room will share, staff on the ground are still absolutely committed to doing the right thing for our tenants and what the housing executive has been known with pride for. Acknowledging, though, solidly the serious issues that have affected the organisation, but I'm hearing and wanted to share with Social Development Committee a real press from the masses to get back to delivering for you and for Northern Ireland. As you've heard from my colleague, not out of the woods yet, and still an awful lot to do to get the organisation back on top on every front. But good progress has been made, and we're seeing encouraging signs in how we're managing both planned and response maintenance contracts. And you'll see some of the positive outcomes from the briefing that we provided and some of the update from my DSD colleagues. A senior management team and boards also. We have confidence now that each contract has a number of clear controls in place, but we're working through a process through both our corporate assurance unit and then our internal audit to make sure we are checking that all of that signs of improvement are real, meaningful, and learning the lessons from what we're seeing there. As I say, still lots to do, and I want to maybe conclude on that point, Chair. The committee will know in questions this morning that we are finalising a resolution to a dispute on the planned maintenance side. So today we do have an agreed position with the contractors, and we're now just formalising to seek consent from DSD and then through to DFP to get full approvals to then enact that agreement. And I'd want, as I leave here today, Chair, maybe some discussion with your clerk on, at the earliest juncture, when we have full approval, on when we could come and talk to SDC in some detail on that. It will take some time for the organisation really to get to the place, again, the ambitions, and I'll get into that in some more detail next week, is to get back to excellence at the Housing Executive, and that's excellence prepared for reforms, if that was the will of the Assembly at any point, or excellence just for the organisation as it sits today. So we're working through a host of changes that I'll share in more detail with you next week to really get the culture of the organisation, the structures fit for the business that we're charged to do. In terms of governance structure, members will be aware, following the governance review back in 2010, we put in place some robust governance arrangements, which brings together legislative requirements around our business, governance principles and processes that all public bodies are expected to have in place. And in 2013, again, the review of our delivery on those issues. You'll see from our note the governance structures include standing orders, an annual review of the framework, assurance statements provided, and regular reports on performance to both our board and through to our Audit Committee. Importantly, the board and our senior management have a system of assurance now across all of our business, but not something we're resting on our laurels on. That today is live and actively reviewed as we progress. Will and Jim have covered the reporting arrangements between DSD and Housing Exec, which I think naturally through that period had to be intensified until everyone was satisfied that the organisation was moving to address in a consistent and a long-lasting fashion how we do our business. At the request of our current board, reporting arrangements were overhauled, and again that's going to be a continuous process for us. Performance roundabout response, planned maintenance, heating and grounds maintenance are now reported to our board every second month. Our Audit and Risk Assurance Committee also considered the detailed findings from the work of both our internal audit and corporate assurance teams. and as my colleague touched on, representative from DSD attends those audit meetings, and we also have representation from the Northern Ireland Audit Office. Assurance arrangements have been strengthened in the Corporate Assurance Unit, and it now reports directly into the Audit and Risk Committee. And I personally meet with the Head of Internal Audit to provide a direct reporting route to myself monthly on any key issues or concerns. You'll have heard, Committee, the DSD's Governance Review of 2010 put forward 75 recommendations that we should put into place to improve governance arrangements. That included critical recommendations and a host of best practice recommendations. Senior management team at the time established an oversight board. We appointed full-time resource to oversee working through those recommendations, and some chair will be ongoing, again just ensuring we refresh our governance approach. Skills of board members, etc. will be something we'll be doing just regularly. I think it's fair to say the implementation of those recommendations on all fronts have been incredibly useful to the organisation, to getting us to where we are today, but still lots of work to do. And the follow-up review recently passed in November 2013. It was agreed that we'd made progress in addressing with 2/3 of the 75 recommendations fully implemented. Our colleagues at DSD advised that 4 critical control recommendations were outstanding, but saw the actions that we have in place to close those out. 3 of those recommendations partially complete, and they'll be fully complete by the summer of 2013, and 1 no longer deemed relevant because we've moved beyond the initial recommendation. In terms of the good practice recommendations, 21 were outstanding. Current position is 10 have subsequently been implemented. 10 partially, 1 is outstanding. Some are connected to the sign-off of that contract negotiation, but again, by the end of this year, they will all be closed off. In turning to the concerns noted by the Controller and Auditor General in his 2012-13 report, we do work closely now with DSD and the Audit Office. Again, they are directly represented at Audit Committee to ensure appropriate oversight. In terms of the recommendations in the 2012-13 report, at the last Audit Committee of the Housing Executive just in March, 3 were complete, 6 were on target, and 4 we were progressing on. The main reason, again, for those issues is round about overpayment, and until we close that off, which is, again, a key concern for this committee too, that will allow us then to move on with these issues. In terms of contracts and contract management on response, as public representatives, you'll know yourselves and hear from your constituents, the maintenance service is critically important to our customers for the services we deliver. One of our highest spending areas, again, and as you've heard some of the concerns on social housing reform, it is vital we deliver investment to our customers to give them what they deserve in services. Whilst by and large we do receive still very positive feedback from our tenants in the service, we have fallen behind the expectations of both public sector and also our customers when it comes to how we've been managing those contracts. So again, a number of actions to improve contract management, and each review has come into one single improvement plan. Structure and management of our response maintenance contracts has been radically overhauled. Committee asked specifically about the Gateway review, which we concluded and received the report just last week, and I'd like to maybe share some of the findings on that today with you. The delivery model for planned maintenance has also been reviewed, and design responsibility moved from contractor to consultant to give us again an added layer of assurance. And at local level, management arrangements have been strengthened, and we have appointed new dedicated contract managers. The new contracts have updated key performance indicators, robust contract management arrangements that allow us to properly hold our contractors to account where there are any issues coming from customers, coming from our assurance arrangements. And that includes the application of low performance damages, and we can explore that in a wee bit more detail with you and how we've applied those to drive the right responses from our contractors. We established a response maintenance intervention team to go in directly to areas where performance was not as it should. That was created in 2012 and deployed to offices with less than satisfactory results from our corporate assurance team inspections. Thankfully, we haven't had to deploy the response maintenance intervention team this year, and that's based on positive outcomes from our corporate assurance team. Again, though, we're doing some review through our internal audit resource just to check in that those positive findings are real and to make sure we're sharing any learning from those. In addition, we have a new statistical inspection regime that's been instigated to let us find the real issues. And as I'll touch on through this discussion this morning, we are looking to move to a place where our audit and assurance gives absolute assurance, but it's proportionate to make sure both staff and contractors are able to get on with the job on the ground. So we'll go into that in a wee bit more detail. In summary, committee, the new regime provides a robust and structured contract management arrangement within the organisation. We now see clear lines of responsibility and accountability, both within our organisation and within our contractors, and the support arrangements that come through that, and very clearly defined escalation arrangements to deal with any disputes or performance issues. On contracts and contract management arrangements on planned maintenance now, committee is aware very clearly of the concerns that were raised around this area, and we are finalised now in reaching agreement on figures with the contractors to close our negotiations on that contract management issue, and we'll now be proceeding to seek formal approvals. And again, the detail of that will be subject to formal sign-offs, and then we'll be able to hopefully come back to Social Development Committee at some stage to present to yourselves. What we can see is that we've drawn up an action plan to address all issues that come out of the intense reviews of the failings in planned maintenance. Our action plans to really move the service now forward to delivering excellence were presented to our board and are updated on a monthly basis. That gives the board the certainty that all the learning is not lost sight of and is embedded in our processes. As with response maintenance, there will now be new contractual arrangements for future planned maintenance contracts. And I can tell committee, and again this has just happened, that we've now been in a place to award those contracts, and I'll be meeting personally along with Jerry with the contractors next week to establish how quickly we can mobilise those contracts and start getting investment happening in our communities at the very earliest opportunity. The new contract arrangements have been constructed to help to design out the problems we saw previously from what was clearly a misinterpretation of how the partnership concept should operate. We have now a larger number of contractors to reduce over-dependence on just a few limited players. The use of independent consultants has been embedded in the new contracts who will be involved in designing schemes, agreeing costs, supervising and approving work contact. And this will give us enhanced controls through segregating duties, a lot of the lessons we've learned from the past, especially with regarding to pricing and inspection. It will help us transfer some of the risks as well associated with design. And we'll have improved access to key technical resources, particularly quantity surveyors, to ensure we have a firm handle on pricing. I said I wanted to share with the committee, and you'd asked specifically on the gateway review on the new response maintenance contracts. We received that report just last week. We're still to take that formally to our board and through formal processes. But in terms of the verbal feedback we have updated our board on the key themes that are coming from that. The review report has presented us with 8 recommendations, again, all accepted by our organisation, and we're now live developing action plans to deal with those. The Housing Exec has taken the opportunity of Gateway 5 findings for us again to review how the contracts are being managed and making sure we get the benefit from all of our arrangements. and critically have the right relationship going forward with our contractors but within the organisation as well. I'll come back, if I can, Chair, to the specifics of Gateway 5, but just working through the statement we gave to you. A big issue, this committee will be aware, was around the culture of the organisation. Some of the adverse findings from DSD's review of governance did point to that specific issue and the skills and knowledge of staff to manage response and maintenance contracts. So we've signalled very clearly from the board and from myself in my time in post at the organisation the need to promote a new culture of integrity, openness and honesty. Things have been within the Housing Executive core values that need to be strengthened. And to complement, though, a real focus on service delivery, to move forward to delivery, and making sure everything we do is of the right response for our customers, delivers value for money, but gets them the services they need when they need it, with appropriate application of governance and accountability. Recently, we have seen a marked and planned increase in the visibility of our board and senior management team, so board members have been out and about meeting staff. As I mentioned, with our senior team and with me personally in my new time in post, by the end of May, I should have met all of our 3,500 staff to give from the top of the organisation the clear messages that we want to move the organisation back to delivering for Northern Ireland. Governance arrangements have been reviewed, also been looking at code of conduct, training, and we're now doing an annual review at board level of skills and successes to make sure that's kept refreshed. In operational terms, to strengthen operational control and oversight, we have a new asset management section that's been created. It has responsibility again for oversight round about maintenance and works. Our experience now is that the management of contracts is not just a one-off task, it has to be embedded as a day job. We have put in place new systems and contracts, but it's clear to me to get this right, the management of contracts and continuous learning just has to be a feature of the day job. We must continually probe and challenge at all levels, and as Acting Chief Executive, that's where my head is, to be absolutely assured that we have all the right systems in place to take the organisation to balance delivering value for money as accounting officer and making sure investment and maintenance services are top class and delivering for our customers. In addressing the culture issues, that does take time, and we've initiated now a major transformation programme, and that's badged the Journey to Excellence, and we're hopefully going to spend time with you next week going into that in more detail. But with all of that, still the consistency that we've built up now over these very difficult years round about governance and assurance. I hope for the committee chair that goes some way to reassuring that the actions have been intensive round about the organisation to address the contract management failings and moving us back to delivering excellent services. I wanted, Chair, to specifically, if that's all right with you, just read a few points from the Gateway 5 review conducted independently for the organisation. In reading from the headline findings and recommendations, the inspectors report back to us, we found that a number of areas of the contract were working well. Improved performance from the contractors was apparent both in comparison to the previous contract arrangements as well as a progressive improvement through the first 18 months or so of the current contract. We found evidence of positive tenant satisfaction. What they go on to tell us, though, is that we found an assurance process in place, but it appeared to reflect the needs of the organisation during a phase of extensive scrutiny. However, as the needs of the organisation, and in particular this contract, move forward, this is a function that needs reviewed and adjusted proportionately to the needs of an established contract management arrangement in a steady state. The overall assurance regime appears to be restricting the ability of the maintenance officers and contractors to act within the spirit of the contract. We're taking that for Social Development Committee as some positive signals that the very rigorous assurance and control arrangements have been delivering, but now again a time to make sure our actions are proportionate, and that's been some of the feedback is we see solid evidence that you have the arrangements strictly controlled, and their sense is perhaps a bit too controlled. What I can't do as acting chief exec is to ensure anything to slip, but again to move the organisation that through the controls in the contract, through those other arrangements we put in place on response and planned, and our layering of corporate assurance, internal audit and external scrutiny, that we're looking in the right places, that we keep moving forward, but not in the way of perhaps staff and contractors being able still to deliver for us. So we're going to be working with this report, taking all of the recommendations and moving that into our core improvement plans that keep us moving forward. But for the scrutiny role of this committee, absolute assurance from me, and you'll hear from our chair, that we won't let anything slip in that process.
Okay, Max, thank you for that. Again, thank you for the volume of information that you've given and the assurances you have provided to the committee during this inquiry. And you do appreciate, and you've just finished off on that point, that it is our statutory obligation to fully scrutinise all of this, and there's no member of this committee wants in any way or at any time to micromanage the work that goes on, and we won't be delving into that, but it is essential that we do our work of scrutinising. You did mention early on, and obviously already ruled early on, of course, that we can't delve into the detail of the issue around the £18 million. I was just discussing that. But you referred to it yourself that, if I'm right, did you say that that negotiation is concluded bar sign-off? Is that? And the reason why I asked this is because we're not getting into the issue of it itself in detail, but it will have a bearing on how the members will actually view all of the assurance that we're being given, because it is contemporaneous in a way. So we're hearing assurances, and we want to hear the assurances quite clearly, and we very much value that. But at the same token, we then have to measure that about what we see on the ground, what we see happening as we speak. So it will have a bearing, no doubt, on members' views and all this. So is there a sense of when that actually might be signed off? Or
yeah, in terms, you'll know, and I know the committee's concerns about closing out that position. So where we are currently is the housing executive and the 4 contractors and their representatives have an agreed position. Before we have approval to that, we would need the approval from DSD and then through to DFP. So that's the bit in terms of not being able at this stage to disclose any of the detail, because it could be subject to change. But housing executive have a negotiated position with the contractor and now want to move on and seek formal approvals.
okay, and my last point I had asked you would be in terms of your predecessor in May, I think it was 2013, had identified like 4 generic issues around the culture, contract management and so on, and the skills within the organisation and the structures in which all of this is kind of dealt with. So, I mean, you've dealt with a number of those. Are you satisfied? I mean, first of all, you're working off the same agenda. Are you satisfied that that agenda was appropriate? Or have you added to that? Or have you subtracted from that? Or are you happy not on those generic issues?
I think in terms of all of the internal and external reviews, those improvement plan recommendations hold true, and we'll be working to see those through to their conclusion. And we'll be adding to, I'm sure, for Social Development Committee as we go through. The organisation needs to have live learning in everything that we do. In terms of contracts, the contractors have a role to play as well there, to be able to share freely their views and make sure that we're moving on. But there'll be nothing in terms of the scrutiny that's been applied that we won't see through to a conclusion. If anything, Chair, I'd like the organisation to move beyond that onto a higher level again. And in terms of the negotiated position, it doesn't affect any of the valuable learning and the way we need to run our business. Looking at culture and the appropriateness of our structures, the Journey to Excellence programme that I'll share with you next week, it is a bit of social housing reform discussions are ongoing. Perhaps at some stage in the future there may be structural change, but there is a serious day job to do for the housing executive our past, we were some years ago known for excellence, and that's what we want to do, is to get back and ready for any structural change if it happens, if that's the will of the Assembly, but back delivering right now for our customers. So these sessions that we're holding with staff is to make sure staff are absolutely clear what we have to do, that we're listening to staff on what's stopping them delivering excellent services for our customers, and we're making sure we move the organisation forward in line with that. So I'm sure we'll see changes, but it'll be improvements along the service.
Okay, Max, thank you. Gregory?
Yeah, it was a very comprehensive presentation. Just a couple of things. You had said about the implementation of the 75 recommendations, but because you've broken them down, I just wanted to be crystal clear in my own mind what the outstanding work was. There were 2/3, so that's about 50 fully implemented. Of the 25, what's the status of the outstanding 25? There was progress, and there was some completed, and there was some in another category. What was that again?
The best practice ones, we'll go into those. The critical recommendations, one was considered, we had moved beyond that, so working with the department, we're considering that non-relevant because we've moved on and done something. One of those that was partially complete was round about risk management arrangements, and we're now down to the level of agreeing templates that we'll use for reporting before we close that off. A big issue in the critical issues is succession planning for the organisation, so that's one of the ones that will take us time. We're making sure for maintenance and contracts we have the right skills in place. We're conducting a skills audit to look at who we have in the business, and if we were delivering mass programme again, what skills would we need so that we're ready for the future. We also have a workforce profile in the organisation where we still do have lots of staff age-wise that will at some point leave the organisation. So we've presented to our board a baseline of the organisation's staffing resources, and now we're going to be taking back in June some proposals for how we make sure that we do succession planning, got all the valuable skills and knowledge of staff, and make sure we have the right people in the right place as we move forward. So that's one that will take us a bit of time, and probably we will work through years to keep refining our staff resources. The other last critical recommendation not complete was learning lessons from our counter-fraud work. You'll know we have a specialist team looking at a range of counter-fraud activities, and one of the recommendations that's still to be fully closed out is making sure we have a clear process for lessons learned from each investigation into the business. We're confident as an organisation we do that, but we don't have a documented systematic process, so we're going to put that in place. That will allow us to close out all the criticals. I'll ask Jerry just to come in on the best practice recommendations.
Just to close out the the best practice, there was 21 of them reported as outstanding. 10 of those are now complete. 10 are partially complete at work in practice, and one hasn't been complete because it's tied up in relation to the processing of a final account for a scheme.
But then, if we take the best practice element of it, are you saying then that half of those that weren't complete still aren't complete?
Yeah, 10 of those are partially completed. It's not incomplete. We have worked our way through these. And it's about the extent to which we have delivered against the written recommendations and what we have done. So some of those recommendations are in around administrative arrangements that didn't sit around, for example, running of the Audit Committee. Administrative arrangements running around how we put together our corporate risk register. So work has been done, and we've committed to finish out all those recommendations. Each of them have timescales set against them. All those recommendations will be complete within this year.
I'd like to give Social Development Committee just assurance that it hasn't been, we haven't been working on them, it's fully completing them. One, for example, is in board member appraisals and reviewing board effectiveness. So we're just into the second year of doing that, and it's something we'll always do. So probably we won't complete that ever, it'll just be an annual process. But we're working with the department just so that they are fully assured, and we have our own internal audit team just checking that we're absolutely solid on closeout, and again, probably with these lifting them into the next stage of improvement.
And just to add on the fraud one, we have got a fraud strategy in place, we have got a fraud risk register in place, and all the staff have been trained in fraud training as well.
Right. But just so that we're clear, if you were back in front of the committee in January 2015, which is after the end of this year, are you saying that all of those issues will all be done,
Yes.
completed in their entirety?
Yes.
All of them? Okay, that's clear enough. The other one that I had to ask about was, you mentioned about the tenant satisfaction in terms of maintenance service, that's risen and now sits at 81%, is that right? So I take it that's sort of a current figure as of now, is it? Right, okay. How does that, how would that sit against comparable tenant satisfaction surveys in the rest of the UK?
Generally, across the piece, our satisfaction across all our services with our tenants is up there with amongst the best in the UK. If you drill down into aspects of those tenant services, where do we need to do some work? We need to do some work in around maintenance. So in the overall context, we deliver fairly good services, people are happy with them, but if you drill down into the actually delivering the day-to-day maintenance service, some of that is a direct read across to the issues we've had in the last 12 months, particularly with the loss of access to contractors, where contractors went into administration and obviously we've created backlogs of work, so the natural response from tenants would have been, we're not getting our repairs done. So that would be an indicator of why that has been down this year.
Yeah.
But we have work to do in terms of improving those levels of customer service.
Yeah, but it's just the wording that we've got is the continuous tenant omnibus survey demonstrates that tenant satisfaction with all aspects of the maintenance service has risen in each of the past 2 years and now sits at 81%, that's page 21. So I take that to mean that the 81% satisfaction rate is with maintenance service?
It is, yes.
Right. But you were saying that it's maintenance service, that
As an
there's more work
organisation,
that has to be
we
done?
need to improve on that. 81% means that, you know, there's 20% of your tenants aren't happy with their
Yeah,
service.
but if you did a tenant satisfaction rate survey of maintenance service in the rest of the UK, on average, where would it sit?
We'd be pretty on a par with the others.
Right.
And one thing I would add to that is we do an exercise every year in terms of benchmarking all our services, and we're due to report to our board in June on last year's performance.
Okay.
I'm happy to share that work with you.
Tenant satisfaction generally with the whole landlord activity is very impressive coming from Glasgow Housing Association. I was quite envious when I arrived, so that's sitting at 93%. In terms of that journey to excellence, though, what we're starting to do is dig in underneath that, look at age profiles, look at what customers want from us in the future. So that's a bit of not resting in our laurels in any manner of means, and starting to understand what we get is 100% from customers. Maintenance is the service customers consume most. It's the thing that will be in their home most. So we'll be working, hopefully, with our contractors going forward round about customer excellence, the whole behaviours piece of delighting our customers when they're over the door. So that's, again, we've got lots of work to really get it in a best in class, but we're doing well in a public sector space and with housing association comparators just now, but we want to do better again.
Yeah, it's just when I see that it has increased, and it's now you're sitting comparable with other similar surveys, then that brings me to the question, what were the satisfaction rates in those surveys, say 3 or 4 years ago, when it's now at 81% and it has risen?
I can get to that. I don't actually have that to hand. Well, I'll get the committee that.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose the nub of it is presumably it was significantly lower. And at that point, 3 or 4 years ago, would that in and of itself, apart from the work that you're doing more widely, would that not have flagged up concerns in terms of tenant dissatisfaction at maintenance service back in sort of 08, 09, 10 period?
That would have been and should have been a key indicator. If you look at how we're managing the service now and some of the penalties we apply, they are based on our internal measures of testing, price, quality, but the customer's voice is a key indicator telling us how well the service is going, and contractors will face penalties if they don't make sure all of those indicators, but certainly at the time it should have been an indicator that something was wrong in the service.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's important to underscore that. I mean, Gregory raised that point, it's fair, raised it early on. I mean, these things were flagged up quite vociferously by a number of people.
Yeah.
So, Ra?
Chair, I'll be brief. Some of the questions have already been asked, but thanks for the presentation. It was very extensive, and it'll probably take us a while to get our heads around a lot of the stuff that's contained in it, and wish as well on the job that you've been doing. In terms of the 81%, you know, and I'm not questioning for one minute the survey said that, you know, we just find it difficult to believe that during a period when there was serious upheaval within the organisation in terms of response maintenance, in terms of other aspects of contracts, that it would be that high.
Survey, the C2S is based on a sample, a rolling sample every quarter, and it is what it is. How do you get a degree of triangulation around that? Is one of the KPIs on the response maintenance contract is where a sample of tenants are contacted by our customer service unit once they've had a repair, and that KPI is measured against the contractors. If they fail to deliver against that, they get measured down, and our performance is reasonable on that. So there is a degree of triangulation. But I say you can't be complacent about these things. I do remember, as you will, as a public rep, many years ago, when the Housing Executive was inundated with complaints about its maintenance service, about the quality of its maintenance service. That is not the case now. Our front offices do not get lots of complaints. As I said, some of the issues during the course of the year were where contractors were into administration and actually work didn't get done, and quite rightly, individuals complained, as did public reps.
I was actually going to say that because for a period of time there was very little maintenance being carried out, and you know, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration too.
It has to be understood as well that in the last year there has still been contractual work going on, and there's been contractual work going on in plant maintenance. So obviously the overlay of around 40 million was expended. So there has been significant work on the ground.
I understand that, and I deal with it on a quarterly, on a daily basis within my own constituency. Within, and I know that there was difficulties and problems. But to go back a bit, I think over this past number of years, I think one of the big problems, besides some of the major issues that there was, is that there has been a serious dent in the morale of people who work for the Housing Executive right across the board. What's been done to try to address that?
Kicking off with me and our board chair has been a lot of the sessions we've been holding for staff. The reality of where we are is the organisation couldn't keep going as it was, and with all the learning that's come out and all of the improvements, a bit of now's the time to get back to delivering. So the sessions I've been having, they're half-day sessions, and I'm committing personally the time to go out and meet all of our staff, to reflect on where we've been, to make sure everyone's clear in why the organisation ended up where it was, but also to acknowledge the hard work that staff were still doing through all of that piece. If I look at our organisation and the 3,500 staff, and played back probably some of the tenant satisfaction results overall, 93% satisfaction with the landlord, our staff were still doing great things. So the scrutiny of this committee, absolutely rightly, on these issues, we still had lots and lots, I would say the masses of our staff still out in the deepest, darkest mornings in houses with customers, helping them with life. So I'm acknowledging with our staff the great work housing professionals do, and looking forward to the challenges our customers are facing in life. Times are tough in Northern Ireland. potentially, if welfare reform does happen, could get tougher. So really trying to unite the masses in our workforce that we need to get back to doing the things we were famed for, and that's the great things round about our services, delivering investment, so moving away from handing back money and actually delivering. So we've got lots of work to do, but to get staff's morale and head back in the right place, the bit that they'd signalled in their staff satisfaction surveys is we need leadership from the top of the organisation, and we'll give them that. And we also need to give them some guidance and space to be able to do their job. One of the stark indicators in our satisfaction survey was half of our staff feeling they weren't empowered and trusted to be able to do their job. So we're not shirking away from these serious issues. Governance and solid good governance has to be at the heart of our organisation, but our staff being able to do what they are supposed to do and be held accountable. And that the discussions, I would say, the responses from these surveys has been hugely impressive. Staff are hungry to get back to delivering for our political representatives and the people you represent. So I think it's the right time and a bit of, for the organisation, what will 2014 bring? And it's a bit of we need to embed this learning and then get delivering on investment, on response, on good services, on innovations, which probably for a few years we've had our eye on sorting these issues out correctly, and now we need to move on and I think start performing.
Also, just to add that the staff had asked with regard to training, and there's been at least 6 months in a row of comprehensive training provided in all the contracts, so that they're very skilled up at this stage to know moving into the new contracts and how to deliver and how to operate them.
Sure, just a couple of other things, a couple of comments. And I'm glad you mentioned Glasgow Housing Association, because that has been held up as an example of where we should be. I'm glad to see that we're advanced in front of in terms of. I've always believed that was the case anyway, and what that suited was other people's agendas rather than. And I do agree that 2014, 2015 will tell a tale. We could step backwards and destroy what we've got, or we could move forward with a stronger platform for all aspects of housing. But I noticed that you sit on the ministerial social housing reform thing. That group, that what we have been told in the past is that there is no interference within the housing executive from that group towards what the housing executive are moving forward on. Obviously, the minister has his agenda in terms of where he would like to see housing, as does the department. But some of the concerns that we have raised is that there seems to be an onward rush within the housing executive on the division between the landlord and strategic services. Regional services within nine. Our concerns has always been is that we've been offered a fait accompli, that we've been told it's a political decision by them, but that it seems to be being removed from us because of the work being done on the housing executive at present.
I sit on the Social Housing Reform Programme Board at officer level, and I'm there to represent the views of the Housing Executive. I learned many lessons in Glasgow, which went through a stock transfer process. I probably learned more lessons in how not to do big change than how to do it. And the last 5 years was getting that last employer of mine working with staff and customers to get that business back on top again. My role in social housing reform is to make sure the views of the housing exec and the housing professionals that sit within it are clearly represented, and as we work through those reform discussions to make sure any proposals, any exploration of options delivers the maximum, I think, for Northern Ireland and its tenants. So we don't sit at that table with any views of the future. That will be for others to decide. And I know in terms of this committee's early discussions in social housing reform, you want to test a host of options, and that's from public sector retention through
But
to...
But what I would say then is that next week we're having a presentation from yourselves around the modernisation programme, which is distinct from the social housing reform programme, whatever it may happen. So we'll deal with that more substantively next week.
Absolutely, and I can get into that in detail next week.
No problem. Okay, Ross, thank you. Stuart?
Chair, thank you. And thank you. Apologies for just not being in at the beginning. We know, and you've been telling us extensively about the targets and the work and the 75 items that have to be dealt with and done, and the programmes that have been worked through, and the training that's being delivered, and the staff empowerment that's being done, and all of those things. And there's a massive amount of effort going into that. How can we be sure, and how are you delivering, if all of that effort is going into dealing with those issues? How are you actually doing the job you're employed to do, which is deliver quality housing, to deliver quality maintenance, and to deliver a public sector housing delivery for Northern Ireland, when it would appear from what you've just said that an awful lot of time and effort, rightly unfortunately, is going into redressing the problems of the past and doing all of those things?
I think all key contributors, our board, me and my senior team, the critical role in scrutiny for Social Development Committee, other participants, until everyone is convinced, and hopefully these sessions give a sense of the years of effort to start to address those issues. But until people are convinced that we're in a good base shape on that core business, I think that's the bit that will then let us move on. I want to embed these types of things so that they are just part of the day job, so move away from hosts of imposed improvement plans to we need to start creating our own improvements and that active learning. There is lots to be done, the organisation, in terms of modernisation. We probably have some years of catch-up to do there. We have big challenges, opportunities though around about succession plans. So all of it will take time, and in coming to work in the housing exec, that was a lot of the work that I did with Glasgow Housing Association. So it doesn't happen overnight, but I've hopefully shown and experienced in my past job how to do it. So we'll take a lot of lessons from work that's been done and from learning from others, and with our team and our staff and our key partners move the organisation forward. I wouldn't say it's easy. We probably haven't been to bed early for a while and won't be for a while yet. But giving this committee assurances to our commitment to turn the organisation back to where it should be.
But Chair, but I'm also looking for an equal assurance that, and I appreciate it's a very difficult ask, that while you're doing all of those things, and clearly you're getting the boxes ticked and you are delivering in that, but at the same time you're not losing focus of where you actually have to be in terms of delivery for tenants and future tenants.
I think what is helpful here is that internally we've structured into two divisions, which is a regional division which looks at us as a strategic entity that is looking overarchingly at housing in Northern Ireland, and then the landlord division that is looking at specifically the repair work and very much on the customer base with the tenants. That's giving us renewed focus, and I actually think with that and moving forward with the controls that Mags has said is in place, and in addition to the requirements and compliance that the staff, who are doing a very hard job at the moment, are aware of, that I think we're in a very, very strong position now that the organisation is turning a corner.
Can I just briefly ask you about because you've mentioned a number of times the whole issue of succession planning, and to me as a former public sector worker, that is an implication of the preparation of staff who are coming through the system for them to be prepared for future management roles within the organisation, which is a perfectly legitimate aim, but it's a very public sector centric concept. Surely, in terms of employment and in terms of enriching the organisation, while clearly you do have to ensure that your staff have adequate training not only to do the job which they're required to do, but that they can be the future managers or deliverers for the future. I hope what we're not hearing is that this organisation just wants to regenerate itself from within, and that it's a very open organisation, and that anybody who may very well have been improved to take part in that succession understands and realises that they will be competing with many other applicants from many other facets of life and employment.
Absolutely. We need the best people to lead the organisation forward, and I'm proud a month in post as Acting Chief Exec that we have a lot of brilliant people within our organisation, but the organisation is now right to regenerate itself. When I talk to staff, some say they were there the first 40 years, but I need to prepare the organisation for the next 40. The sessions that we're having are that bit of let's lift ourselves out of just the traditional public space. So some of the discussions with staff is, what's your best company? That has to be our ambition for the housing exec, that in terms of we'll still be a public sector body, but we want to be delivering and achieving way above anyone, not only in our comparator groups, but benchmarking with businesses as well. So starting to get a real look at skills, and we are in a modern age, so that there's probably different skills that we need going forward, and that blended mix of people coming through the routes, opportunities for graduates, opportunities for new blood. It's been my experience that that gives you a really rich blend of folks to take the organisation forward. Working with, we work with a host of key partners. The level of investment we do, we create lots of employment opportunity. So I think the Housing Executive has a role to play to drive that best in business way beyond just our 3,500 staff.
And finally, Chair, you made reference to contracts and to working with contractors, and again, obviously looking to get the best from them. And you made reference in the report with regards to low performance damages, which to me is some just sort of fine system or fault system dealing with contractors. And it sounds fine. And I hope in one sense it doesn't happen that often because the contractors are actually performing. But can you tell us, do you carry through? Because that so often is the failure of so many audit and public sector reports. We hear the fancy words and the funny phrases like low performance damages. It just means you're either not getting another contract, or we're going to fine you for the work you've done, or we're going to make you to do it again and again and again until you get it right.
Yeah. I suppose one of the key changes of the current contracts on response maintenance was the introduction of low performance damages. So when they were first set up, we gave the new contractors 3 months bedding in, so they got a feel for, here's your scores every month for 3 months. And it was an interesting learning experience for them from over that first 3 months to get to a position where they realised they were going to be applied. We do apply them. Suffice to say, generally speaking, the performance of our contractors pretty good. So the scores on the doors every month are green, fortunately. And you can see the trends from when we first introduced them to the tail end of the year. So it was like a patchwork quilt. Some greens, a lot of ambers and reds in those first 3 months. And the colour chart changes gradually throughout the year. So the colour is predominantly green. But there are ambers and reds, and we raise those low performance damages against them where they're appropriate. There have been a number of contractors whose performance has been escalated as a result of their non-performance. One who actually got to a final escalation stage and is now on a weekly monitoring plan. So we do apply it. If I understand rightly, I think the level of which we've raised low performance damages this year is somewhere in around the region of about £100,000.
Can I just apologies, Chair, just to interrupt at this stage. A weekly performance plan, if you were in the private sector, that just wouldn't be working for you any longer.
Under the terms of the contract, we are duty bound to put contractors on notice, final notice. And in this particular situation, the severity of such it is down to a weekly performance over a short period of time. And the outworking of that is if that's not delivered, then that contract will be terminated. As a result of us getting another contract in place.
How many have been terminated?
On terms of maintenance, we haven't terminated any of the contracts in the current term. 2 contracts went into administration by their own default.
I understand.
But we haven't formally terminated any of the current response maintenance contracts.
And many are on weekly monitoring?
1.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a bit of the balance, the message to staff in the organisation to ensure you get comfort on this is we need to be strong and decisive when things go wrong, both with staff and with contractors, but also learning from Gateway 5 to work with our contractors to get the best from them. So that's the bit I want to meet personally with all our response and our new plan maintenance contractors to set out our stall, to create opportunities where we talk and listen to them regularly and what we can do better to help them and vice versa. But people being clear on the consequences if any of this were to surface, we'll deal with it strong and decisively.
Okay, thank you. Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Just Fra had mentioned about the morale of staff and that, and you have met with approximately 2/3. Part of the difficulty, apart from the daily grind the staff have, because it's a difficult job, and the vast majority do it very, very well, is the perceived uncertainty about their future. That's certainly a message I'm getting, and I'm dealing with them on a daily basis with local housing executive staff. The other thing, just a couple of other things. In terms of the omnibus, the continuous omnibus tenant satisfaction survey, obviously the 81% are people who have had maintenance, either response or planned maintenance done, but there are many, many, many people who haven't been that lucky, who are waiting on response or planned maintenance. So it's kind of not an unexpected answer in a way, relatively, of course, but you're only dealing with those people who have actually had maintenance done. Now, as you're aware, the housing executive have handed back a huge amount of money in the past year. Would you be confident that the money that is allocated to the housing executive in the future would be used for the purpose for which it was intended, whether it be planned maintenance or the building of social housing or supported housing or whatever? And I wasn't going to mention it, but you did, in terms of welfare reform, because Glasgow is a good example where it hasn't worked in terms of the bedroom tax, where housing associations have built 3-bedroom houses and they cannot let them because people are reluctant to move into them because of the bedroom tax, and therefore they cannot service the loans to repay for those houses. So I know it's not necessarily relevant to this, but it's just, I did mention it yourself. Well, I only mentioned it because you had mentioned it, so I just wanted to make the comment on it.
Picking up those issues, and I'll maybe cover next week how we're managing with staff with changes and uncertainty, and making sure we're keeping our staff involved in that. In terms of survey, Jerry's touched on the numbers there, and I think that's a valid point, that only when we rank up the programme do we get a real mass test. In terms of expending our budgets at a time when this committee are hearing of underinvestment in our houses, yeah, it's just not palatable for me as acting chief exec if I were sitting at the end of the financial year handing back investment monies in our own stock. We are a bit behind the cosh with the contracts being late and being let, and that's now taking place, and that's part of the meeting with the contractors, is how quickly can we mobilise, still making sure that we don't fall back to any old practices, but how quickly do we mobilise. And that's on the board's agenda, is they want regular reports in our budget profiles to show how we're going to spend. So that's a bit that's top of my agenda, and I need to work through with our contractors and our board, but keeping all of this in mind, that anything we do has to be delivered well, protecting the public purse, but trying to get investment back to our tenants again.
Thank you. Fra, you
Just one point, and I know all the reasons why all the new measures have been brought in, but when it gets down to the working relationship between your people on the ground and contractors, is there a degree of flexibility is required to ensure that the whole thing just doesn't come to a stop?
Some of the gateway findings, and again we got that last week, so we were already working on some of the action plan, but their sense was it's a bit too adversarial in terms of all of the control and scrutiny and audit checks in place. We probably aren't seeing the right relationships with staff and contractors. So as we get the balance right, again, I have to look at how we still do audit and assurance but keep it proportionate. So I think there is work to be done there, and that's one of the bits, and they've made clear recommendations, including a contractors forum where they get to talk to us regularly. We were already on that in terms of we need the relationships that will work, but still assure this committee, our board, me, that money's being well spent. So it's a bit we do need to do some work on.
Okay, members, thank you. Max, can I thank yourself and Jerry and Siobhan, unless you have anything else to add? If you don't, well, we can conclude this particular evidence section. Thank you for the presentation that you've given here this morning, your responses to questions from members and the material that you provided to us. And could you just accept that, obviously, as was said, other members have said, this is ongoing work and we've obviously need to take time to absorb the both presentations we've had this morning, so we may well be coming back with maybe further questions and so on as we move ahead in the short time ahead. So could I again thank yourself very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Good luck for the work you're involved in. Thank you. Okay, members. Members, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 7, Statutory Rule 52, Domestic Energy Efficiency Grant. Could I formally invite Steve Martin and Eilish O'Neill to the table? Mickey, one of you just spare this for a couple of seconds.
Yep.
So we are, if you want. It's just that I'm just going to, as I introduce this section, I'm just going to move out myself, step out for a couple of minutes and back in again. But I think just to remind members here what this is about is obviously, and this would be page 28 of your pack. And it's the Statutory Rule 52, Domestic Energy Efficiency Grants. So there was some, maybe, 1, 2, 3, we're down to 3, 4 members, we're down to 4 members. We can't really deal with this in any. Should we just adjourn then for 5 minutes to see what's happening with the rest of the members? I'll just go and check what's happening. Eilish, thank you and Stephen for your patience there. Again, look, just we're dealing with the Statutory Rule 52, and there was some, I think, maybe lack of clarity in the minds of some people around the effect of the Statutory Rule, and then there was some recommendations or some suggestions from the Examiner of Statutory Rules around the possible defect in the regulation itself, Regulation 7, I think. So, could maybe yourselves just explain to the committee what the rule is about and maybe clear up any misunderstanding there may be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
Just to explain the purpose really of the rule is looking backwards. It's really to give statutory authority to things that we're already doing in terms of the boiler replacement scheme and the pilot for affordable warmth. This has happened quite often, that there's an impetus to bring something in, so the boiler replacement was brought in quite quickly. The Department of Finance and Personnel give us extra statutory approval on the understanding that we will then go for statutory approval to do certain things, and that's essentially what this is. So this would formalise authority really for the boiler replacement scheme, which has been very successful, and the pilot for affordable warmth. But it doesn't give us any statutory authority whatsoever to expand or do a new affordable warmth scheme. We would have to come back to the committee if we do anything other than the current scheme as we have. So this is not an attempt in any way to try and introduce something new by the back door. This is very much just to formalise really what we have done. The affordable warmth consultation closes tomorrow, and we're scheduled to come to the committee in June. But we're very clear we would need new regulations if we were to introduce a new scheme. But this is very much about the past.
Okay, and tell me, just because you just clear up, has there been any problems associated with maybe making increased payments without statutory cover, or is that not an issue?
No, there is a mechanism, and we've used it several times in the past for extra statutory approval from DFP, but we always have to then seek statutory approval. Generally what we do is make sure that there is support for the measures, so we obviously were briefing the committee and so on before we introduced boiler replacement. If there hadn't been support, then obviously we'd have had to bring the rule quicker, but it was just, there was a timing issue over staffing and process and so on, so we're a bit further behind than we'd wanted to be, and it's perhaps taken us a bit too long to get to this stage, so we apologise for that, but this is very much about making sure that we regularise the position in terms of boiler replacement. And
in just terms of the procedure and the timing of all that, I mean, would that not have been better been flagged up to the committee at the time, or it surely couldn't have been an afterthought that you might need to rule for that? I'm just wondering why would that have not been flagged up to the committee at an earlier stage? Because if you were through a process of establishing your own mind, while it was a, I think you used the term political agreement for what you were intending to do, would not have been appropriate to say to people, by the way, we'll also need a statutory rules for this, but we mightn't have the time. I don't know, but just,
Is there anything
I can't remember if that was included in the briefing at the time, Chair, but I can go and check that. But when we came, it was with the outline proposal of this is what the scheme will look like, and this is what what the grant max will be, and this is what we are proposing to do with, and I'm not sure, I'd need to go and check to see if we were very explicit in terms of, and we will be introducing legislation. That was very explicit in our business case to DFP, which was then approved on the condition that, okay, as long as you amend the regulations following this, just to, as Stephen has used the term, to regulise the payments.
But I mean, Chair, if we weren't clear, we apologise for that, and obviously we'll make sure that we are clear in terms of future work.
no, thank you for that. Maggie Braley?
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't here on the 3rd of April, but from reading the stuff, it seemed that people were concerned because more money was being injected into a scheme that was finishing on the 18th of June, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you're saying it was actually retrospective.
Yes.
The people
Yes.
were already doing the work, but the money wasn't available at that time. Was the regulation introduced in Britain for, was it already in operation?
They
Or was
don't
it
have.
specific to the north there?
The boiler replacement scheme that we have here doesn't exist
So
anywhere
it's
else outside of
specifically
Northern
for-
Ireland, specifically for Northern Ireland. The warm home scheme has been replaced with Green Deal in the rest of the UK, so we don't have it here. So our warm homes and our Grant Max and our boiler replacement scheme, and in fact the affordable warmth pilot, are all Northern Ireland specific schemes, so there isn't a read across to any piece of legislation.
But the money was actually to pay retrospectively contractors who are already doing the work. That money wasn't available. They were doing it, I suppose, in a sense, in an unauthorised way, but this is now compensating for that, presumably.
It was carried out. Sorry,
Sorry,
it was carried out with the approval that the monies be spent. What happened in relation to the Warm Homes Grant Max was that very early on in the new scheme, the scheme contractors approached the housing executive who managed the contract on our behalf and said that they were coming across increasing numbers of property where solid wall insulation was needed, and the Grant Max that had been set wasn't sufficient. So we then had to gather the data, prepare the business case, go to DFP, put our case. They came back and said, okay, the Grant Max can be raised, but then the domestic efficiency regulations had to be
It has to be formulated.
amended. And with boiler replacement, we were asked if we could develop a scheme, which we did. The scheme had a 3-year lifespan, so we started the scheme again with the with DFP approval, and had come to the committee and put forward a scheme. But so the scheme had started, and then we began work on amending these regulations to reflect that.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, Fra?
Sure, it's just that it may not be the place to discuss it. And I think that the warm home scheme is going to be called affordable warmth, is it? Or is it just going to still remain the warm home scheme?
And the consultation on affordable warmth is finishing tomorrow. The main crux of what we're proposing is that we focus even more on those at the sharp end. So we've got quite a sophisticated targeting tool. The pilots have shown that targeting tool works, and essentially what we're proposing is that we then use that targeting tool to focus on those in greatest need, and that we look at the measures and that we look at the grant limit. Obviously, the outcome of that consultation we don't know yet. When we have it, we'll analyse the responses and come and speak to you in June about what people have said about that scheme. If the decision is taken to bring in affordable warmth, warm homes will cease. But broadly speaking, they're very similar schemes. The main differences are affordable warmth is a much more sharply focused on those who are in fuel poverty, and those particularly who are in severe and extreme fuel poverty. And the targeting tool that we have developed is one of the most sophisticated targeting tools available anywhere in the world in terms of fuel poverty. So it's very much about taking the lessons learned from warm homes, but applying them and really targeting need much more in a much more sophisticated and a much better way.
Well, tell me this, to see the new system, obviously, you know, I've said it many times, I get fairly cynical when we talk about consultations. Maggie's raising his eyebrows here, substantial eyebrows, should I say. Yeah. And that there is a short time period between when the consultation finishes and the new scheme comes into being. It doesn't give you the time, I believe, to take on board maybe many of the concerns that would think. But one of the concerns that I had raised in the past is the administration. I know the housing executive will be delivering it, but there was something there about Queen's University. Correct me if I'm wrong.
University of Ulster, yep, that's right.
And how that.
But that's a different, I mean, that's not the regulations, that's the new scheme.
That was some work that was commissioned by the University of Ulster in helping to develop the targeting tool. It's not really around, ongoing delivery of a scheme. It was around specific pieces of research which help inform the pilots.
To see if somebody's going to make an application.
But you're talking about a new scheme, this is about the regulations, so let's deal with the regulations, and then we'll take a briefing later on terms of the new scheme. Consultation doesn't end. Do we have a date when we're going to do that again?
The scheme will
The
be
9th. We're coming back in June.
I think it's the 19th of June.
19th of June, we're taking a
Middle of June,
presentation.
The scheme will be coming on the operation.
But the consultation hasn't formally closed until...
Tomorrow.
The 12th of June, which is when we're not having.
Finishes tomorrow.
Chair, we'll let members know about the revised date.
Can I ask, I mean, are you satisfied that the examiner of statutory rules, the issues, both the issues there, one was about the drafting defect in Regulation 7, and you understand that the regulations have to be revised later in the year? Are you satisfied that they have been addressed?
Yes, we've had ongoing conversations with
Okay, can I then, I mean, clearly just for the record and tidy this up, the statutory rule has already in the operation, so that's done. But it would be better if the committee then takes a decision whether we're content with the rule, and then if that is the case, then I read that in the motion, or read that motion in the record, just so that people can endorse the statutory rule. Are members happy enough with that?
Yes.
Okay, so I know it is retrospective, but the formal motion is that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule 52, the Domestic Energy Efficiency Grants Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and has no objection to the rule. All agreed? Agreed. Thank you, members. Ellie Stevens, could I thank you for that, and look forward to seeing you again in terms of the new scheme. Thank you. All right, sir. Okay, members, so we're the next item on it. 410, you can take us through. Who's counting, man?
Probably moving towards a 5th.
And here's 3 o'clock, hasn't it? Okay, so
More times a day he's been.
that's it. Item number 8 on the agenda, Social Housing Development Programmes, the departmental update, and we have again Stephen Martin, Beverly Bigger, and Mark Graham from both the Department and Housing Executive, just to brief the committee on the programme. So, without any further ado, I can just leave you to make your presentation. Okay. Thank you.
Keep it fairly brief. Thank you, Chair. Keep it fairly brief to allow as much time for questions as possible. The Social Housing Development Programme has consistently achieved its targets over a number of years. The outturn for this year that's just finished was 1,299 starts against a target of 1,275. And enough land was purchased this year to enable 1,200 units to be started in future years. There is a major step up this year in terms of the target to 2,000 units, and the Assembly has also called on the Minister to aim to exceed this target. Given the long lead-in times for capital projects, this will be extremely challenging, but the Department and the Housing Executive are committed to doing all that we can to meet and exceed the current target. And we're driving a process of continuous improvement in the Social Housing Development Programme. A lot of work has been done, and it's in your briefing, and more is planned. However, we will need the help of others to meet what are very stretching targets, and because of that, the Minister has written to both the Environment and Regional Development Ministers, seeking their support to speed up the planning system, and to the Finance Minister on the availability of further finance, and we're awaiting a response. We'll also need broader community support to enable development and targets to be met, especially in areas of high housing need where there's limited land. The Housing Executive has the statutory responsibility for determining housing need. A significant amount of that need is met each year through relets, but the Housing Executive has determined that the new build need for this year is 2,000 units. For the first time in many years, the Social Housing Development Programme target reflects the need identified by the Housing Executive. The Minister is on record that he's keen to maintain building at this level over the next number of years, subject to finance being available. As I said, the SHDP, the Social Housing Development Programme, is a major capital investment programme, and in common with similar programmes, brings with it significant delivery challenges. Our collective aim as the Department and the Housing Executive will be to build as many units as possible within available budgets, to do so in as timely, efficient and effective a way as we can, and to align delivery as closely as possible to the needs identified by the Housing Executive. As I mentioned earlier, many improvements to programme delivery have been made, and specifically draw members' attention to the PEDU report and the recommendations of that, which are well on the way to being implemented. But we do recognise that more needs to be done. We're working together on a new delivery strategy for the social housing development programme, focusing on achieving further improvements in the medium term. This strategy will be aimed at reducing barriers and improving further on the efficiency and effectiveness of delivery. And we're obviously very happy to talk through what our initial plans are on that, Chair, and back to you.
Okay, Steve, before I bring members in, there's a couple of points I'd like to make. One is I still can't get any clarity in my own mind or any formal clarification around who assesses the need for supported housing. I mean, I've raised this before and I've asked for some understanding of that, and I understand it's a health-related matter as well, because there are people with special needs who need supported housing, and there's no clear understanding as to who actually determines that need. In my simple mind, if you cannot identify the actual need, then what targets are set for delivery to meet those needs? I mean, I've spoken to parents, made representation on behalf of some people who just find it virtually impossible to actually tie down a department or an agency to work out, you know, okay, there is a need for this person, in one case a need for their daughter to get a home for themselves, and it's causing a lot of anxiety to parents who are starting to get into middle age and beyond, are worried that their daughter who's an adult but has clear needs, how will she be able to fend herself in the longer run? So there is big concern. So it's about where does the responsibility lie to formally assess that need? And then the second point was, I think in paragraph 14 of your paper, you talk about the housing need met primarily through relets of existing stock. If you read that statistically, it tells you that there's some 8,000 properties allocated to new applicants each year. Now, that would suggest then, if you do that 3 years in a row, that's 20,000, so that would clear the housing stress list. Well, it doesn't.
No, because more people come on, Chair. Yeah.
More people come on, so it's, in a way, I'm not saying it's a false, I don't want to use the pejorative word, but it certainly doesn't actually, in my opinion, reflect that it's not meeting the need. So for me, there are arguments bandied about in one constituency or another about the level of need, but there clearly is a level of need, and the Assembly did express that. So at what point do we actually work out that even if you go to 2,000 units per year, that's going to clear a backlog? It isn't. In the minds of the Assembly members, actually. So how do we actually get the nub of that? Or is it, rather than talking about statistics, we're talking about how do we actually address the need in a relatively short period of time? Because I think that is the job of the Housing Executive and the Department. So that's two key points.
In terms of, maybe if I start, do you want to start on the supported living?
Yeah, on supported living, the assessment is a joint assessment between really health and housing executive supporting people function that determines what is a number of client groups, and there's a joint agreement in terms of what the need is for each of those client groups, whether it's elderly, dementia, learning disabilities, and so on. That is put together then as a programme that's required over a period of time. So that the initial assessment that created the 850 units was done in 2010, and that was basically an assessment. Each of those client groups would require this amount of accommodation over that period, and then a programme of work was developed to deliver that. So it's a joint commissioning process by the Health and the Housing Executive and others like the Probation Board and other interested parties that actually have an agreed determination of what supported housing requirements are. There's also individual complex needs cases. So if the Housing Executive Office has a case where people have a particular disability or a particular problem with the suitability of their accommodation, we have a process where a complex needs officer will work with occupational therapists and social workers to determine what sort of accommodation that person needs. We will do an options appraisal which will determine that that person may need an adaptation to their own home. They may need a new build property, which would then come under the development programme, or it might be appropriate for the Housing Executive or a housing association more likely to acquire a property and adapt it to those needs. So there is one that looks at overall supported need accommodation, but there is a process also that deals with individual cases and how those individuals are accommodated in ways that suits them. And as you said, obviously people's circumstances change as parents get older and so on. So the process is meant to take account of those changing circumstances also.
But is it not very complex in a way that it's just confusing for people? Because most of us will deal with a housing application and we'll make representations on behalf of them on the basis that they have X number of points. So we'll all look around, well, where's the next development, where's the next prospects for these people to get a home, and you'll work your way through that. In these cases, it's very difficult to pin that down because there isn't an actual list of people with special needs. So there's no housing list, there's no list where you say, well, they're next on the list for a particular type of property. So to me, it's still very, very, very vague.
Yeah, but the process is that we will determine if the right solution is a new build, that person with that particular requirement, whether it's a bungalow property or whatever else, will be put on a programme with associations. And a housing association will then commit as part of their scheme development that be included within that development. If it's a case of purchase, we will agree with the association they will purchase a property and go on and adapt it. Clearly, I mean, we do recognise that when the solution is a new build property, that could take up to 2 years for that property to actually be to be built. So, I mean, we do understand the stress and difficulty that causes individuals, but I mean, that is how the process is meant to operate to find suitable accommodation.
But does that, I mean, I don't want to belabor this point, so I'll leave it on this point. I mean, there are a small number of schemes which are there, because it seems to me this is probably more suitable for schemes as opposed to a one-off property here and there, because obviously the very nature of it needed some type of support. That's probably best delivered in a scheme, not always, but very often. So you would imagine if you could develop appropriately located small number of schemes, it'd probably go a long way to address this problem. I just don't think it's been properly fully assessed, and with that solution in uppermost in people's minds. I may be wrong, but I haven't seen the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, we would accept it's often difficult to find the right property and find the right solution for individuals. What we do seek to do is, if a scheme is not available in a location that would suit that particular family, we have the option that we do use that a housing association can go and acquire a property in that locality and adapt that property for individuals' use. That solution sometimes isn't suitable depending on the nature of the disability or the needs of that family.
Okay, thanks for that.
On the second point then, in need, I mean, none of us here are experts in terms of how the housing executive do that. There's a dedicated unit, but in fairly simple terms, there's a top-down and a bottom-up process. The top-down process is a thing done by academics called the net stock model. It's currently being reviewed by the housing executive. It looks at the whole housing market, and it's what's called a residual model. So it assumes that there's a rational market and that it functions effectively, and it basically says, is there enough housing to meet the needs of people in Northern Ireland? And then it residualises and says, okay, the social need is basically the housing that's left once the private sector has developed its units and so on. The bottom up then is taken from the waiting list. So 1,200, the net stock model at the minute estimates a need for 1,200 units a year. The housing executive then do a bottom up assessment from the waiting list and say, look, to make sure that need from previous years, which hasn't been met through the social housing development programme, is addressed. We estimate that there's another 800 units needed, so that makes up the 2,000. So that's broadly how that's composed. But I mean, the committee may wish at some stage to ask the housing executive to brief you on that. I suppose the other point that's worth making is need can't only just be met through the new build programme and through relets. There are other means of doing it. The housing executive, through their homelessness strategy at the minute, is currently examining what's called the Housing Options Service, which runs very successfully in Scotland. And that's really about, for those for whom it would be appropriate, what other housing solutions are available and how can people be supported to sustain those. And executives at a relatively early stage in terms of examining how that might be introduced, but that would be another way of meeting need.
Okay, but I mean, I've been told that 1,200 social houses per year will clear up the housing backlog, because there's no question of doing that. So
No, I mean, it's an estimate. If you start from scratch and look at population growth, household formation and so on, you would assume 1,200 would meet housing need, assuming the private sector was functioning. But we recognise there's been an under-delivery in previous years to meet needs, so that's where the additional 800 comes from. And I mean, the 2,000 is an estimated figure that we use to say, well, 2,000 should, over a period, clear the backlog. You know, but this is a rolling process because it makes certain assumptions about how the private sector will develop, what rate it will develop at, how the economy will change. So, I mean, our best estimate at this stage is that 2,000 over the next number of years, you know, will meet projected housing need plus also address the backlog.
Okay, so I suppose from to satisfy my mind, then what we're dealing with here this morning is a presentation within the framework of 2,000 units per year. I don't believe that goes anywhere near addressing the need, but that's the framework that you're governed by.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes.
and obviously then I think we will be taking up the offer to take a more substantive position around what is the real need, because some people have different views of that, what the extent of that actually is. So we'll follow it up. So within the framework that you have outlined. Thank you, Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I sit in the Health Committee, and yesterday we actually visited a supported living scheme in Downpatrick, Cedar Court, I think it's called, and that's a joint enterprise between the South Eastern Trust, the Trinity Housing Association and the Housing Executive. As 24 units, they would deal with people who have some mild dementia, but it's very impressive, I have to say, and they're in the process of commissioning, I think, another 3 in that area, which obviously will go somewhat towards fulfilling the need in particular areas. But Bamford's been around for a long time, since 2002 approximately, and yet there's been no real effort made to initiate and carry forward the Bamford plans in that sense. And I'm just wondering, is there a commitment in the programme to actually fulfil that? Because the Minister himself said a few months back in the Assembly that it failed to reach the supported living, supported housing targets. The other thing, you had mentioned in your report about housing associations responsible for identifying sites for new schemes with prior housing executive support, responsible for development scheme proposals. Now, we were told back when Fran and I were in the committee back in 2007, there was almost £1 billion worth of land banks owned by both the housing executive and housing associations. Now, obviously, in terms of the property bubble bursting, the value of those went down, but it would seem to me that if therefore it was easier to access them by the housing associations particularly, yet that doesn't seem to have been done. Now there are some schemes, for instance, there's one in my own constituency which Clonmel are just in the process of completing, and that was built on a site owned by the housing executive. That's why that particular site was chosen. That doesn't seem to be happening. And you wonder where all these land banks have disappeared, or are they holding out until the prices go up again? Because if they do, then it would be reasonable to assume that housing associations may not be able to afford them. Just wondering what the rationale or the logic in the sense is behind that.
Yeah. Perhaps if I can start with Bamford. The three of us have led a process over the last couple of months where we've had trusts, health and social care trusts and the board and housing associations around the table because we were concerned about the blockages. In my mind, there are 2 different issues. Resettlement, which is the pure Bamford, so that's resettling people from the long stay, hospitals, learning disability, mental health. It has been difficult, but we will get there. We will meet that part of the supported living target, but a bit delayed, and we're having to come up with different solutions, which tend to be more buying existing properties and adapting them rather than building schemes. We've had a lot of community opposition to schemes, and it's been quite difficult. And we have a lot of people with complex needs that it's taken a bit longer to get through. That bit, I'm fairly confident the system operates relatively effectively, and we'll get there. What I'm less confident about is the other side of the supported living agenda around physical disability, elderly care, and I think there's a job of work to be done which we're very clearly focused on in terms of unblocking the blockages that are there, and there are clear blockages around financial risk to housing associations from delivering those schemes, and there are blockages around the cost of those schemes, and there are blockages around the process. And we're currently working through an action plan to try and address those blockages, and we've been engaging with the WIFM DFM around delivering social change monies that might be available to help with Atlantic Philanthropies, with the trusts, with the board, to try and see if we can have a bit of a dedicated focus on developing a solution for the medium term, particularly for those client groups, those with dementia, those with physical disabilities, because the system at present isn't working as it should. So I suppose we would separate out the two. Resettlement working relatively well, but slower than we thought. The other groups, we really need to try and address the blockages. On land, I'll bring Mark and Beverly in on this, but just to kind of deal with that briefly, a lot of land, housing executive land, has been transferred already to housing associations to build. A lot of the land that is left isn't necessarily in areas of housing need, and it's a bit problematic. We're working to see if some of that land could be released for affordable housing, and we're going to be piloting a few pockets to see if there's an appetite for that, so we can make best use of it to meet housing need. But big social schemes are going to be more and more difficult on that land. Land availability is a key issue for us, and we are in discussions with the housing executive whether it can play a greater role in land assembly in terms of supporting the social housing development programme, and that's part of our delivery strategy. There are a number of larger sites that the housing executive could play a critical role in terms of acquiring, master planning and so on, and that will be a theme within our delivery strategy. But you're absolutely right. Unless we do something different on land, in future years it's going to be difficult. We've been very successful at funding housing associations to advance land purchase, and they've bought enough land for 1,200 units, and we're going to increase that. But actually having a different focus on how we acquire and use public sector land is something that we're very acutely aware of.
Yeah, maybe pick up. I think there's three separate issues. One is private sector land. There's surplus public sector land. There's housing executive land. Housing associations are currently actively searching for private sector sites and private sector land, and they've had, as Stephen was saying, some success in finding those sites. However, what they report to me is that there are still people out there who are expecting land prices to increase, and therefore are sitting waiting, hopefully, that their prices will rise. There are some places where there's very high housing need, where there are not that many available sites. So we certainly recognise that land supply is an issue, and we're trying to work, for example, with NAMA and banks to understand how to unlock that land. In terms of housing executive land, Stephen's already touched upon this. The sites that we have left, and we are active, we continue to actively look for sites, particularly within our estates, that can be developed, are often quite small sites. A lot of our good sites have already gone to the social housing development programme. A lot of them are in our estates, and they're classified as open space, which means they can only be developed with working with the planning service and working with the local community. And as you can imagine, communities don't really want somebody to go and to just populate their entire open space with housing. But we are actively working on a number of sites to look at if we can do infill and we can make better use of our land. But I think realistically, a lot of our best development land, certainly the best development land that exists where there's housing need, has already been developed. I was just looking at some of the figures there. In 2012-13, about 47% of the programme got delivered through a combination of our land and public sector land. Last year, that was down to about 31%. So I think there's a diminishing return from our land. A significant amount of the programme, or certainly a fair amount of it, this year it was 9 schemes, 144 units. The year before, 224 units was delivered of surplus land, so land from health trusts, education and so on. And I think we've been talking to SAB and others, and I think there's an acceptance. There's more we can do about that. We look at whatever sites come up, and we try to the associations try to acquire those. I think we'd accept there's more work to be done, trying to look more strategically long term. And as Stephen said, looking maybe more at master planning those sites, working with others to make them a bit better schemes, bigger schemes. So I think there's more we can do about that. But again, it is worth emphasising most of the programme is still delivered by housing associations through private sector land acquisitions.
I suppose what we were also doing to support that is
that this year, or this past year, we piloted a design and build competition, and that was successful in one of the areas we piloted, and our intention is we would roll that out this year, and that may deliver us another tool in delivering us private, what would be private sector land. We're also exploring the potential for joint ventures between housing associations and private sector. We would see that as a tool for accessing more private sector land, but perhaps also enabling smaller associations who aren't developing to get into the development programme. And I suppose the advanced land purchase, just not to underestimate the impact that has had. In previous years, we averaged about 4% of land banked in the year when we started out the year. This year we started with 60% of the land banked, and that's something we're intending to increase and expand on and continue, because it provides us with that certainty in future years. SIB also recognising, and sort of across government there's a recognition that we could transfer public sector sites perhaps more quickly. So they're leading out on a reform of property management, and their intention is by 2017 that a team within SIB will manage all of the surplus public sector sites, and we would hope that would speed up that process of transferring those sites.
Thanks. Just to finish off, I mean, there are two issues, I suppose. There's acquiring the wherewithal to build the supported housing, supported living accommodation, and then there is the type of accommodation. Interestingly enough, yesterday, that scheme has 24 units. 12 of them are for people with mild to moderate dementia, but they're actually geared up that will eventually become a scheme which will cater for people with dementia. So there's forward planning and thinking, and it seems to be like a model of good practice in that sense. So it's maybe something that the department should be looking at, because it is a joint venture, and I think Mark, you did mention there are two issues: there's health and DSD, and sitting in both committees is easier to see maybe the overarching issues that are involved. But certainly that scheme yesterday is very much geared up for, and we are told constantly that dementia, people are living longer but not necessarily more healthily. The incidence of dementia will certainly increase hugely within the next, we've been told, 15, 20, 30 years. So those type of schemes are going to be able to cater in a much better fashion for people who will have those complex needs. And it just seems to me there's not enough maybe thought going into other schemes that could be replicated from that particular type of scheme, because it certainly came, and we had the opportunity to talk to residents who are very, very happy with the whole. It was just a lovely place to be, and you knew by talking to residents who were all, some of them in their 80s, well in their 80s, who were quite happy to spend the rest of their days there. But it doesn't seem to me that there's enough of those type of schemes. Schemes are built without necessarily a degree of forward planning. Something maybe you should be paying more attention to.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Fra?
Sure, and I think you're right that we probably need a broader discussion on this issue, because when we mention one element of housing, it throws up a number of questions, and I know, Mark, you talked about that there's somebody with specific needs, then a housing association can go off now, but it's not quite that simple. And I've dealt with a number of cases where it's become impossible for people who have needs to get a housing association, to get the permission from the department to actually move ahead and purchase that property and deal with it. And even if you go back to what Beverly is saying, and the connection between the social sector and the private sector and the design and build, and it'd be interesting to find out where that's at, because I know under European law that was stopped a while ago. But are you talking about black leasing in terms of there's a thing, because if it's black leasing, that you end up paying through the teeth when the properties are leased from the private sector, and it costs more in the long run per unit than it does. And I think that when Mickey talks about the certain types of developments, there's the one that's been going on for quite a while now is the over 55s. That housing associations have done that have a good track record, or well perceived and well received within different communities because they're well run, and they do offer some type of backup for people that may have different forms of disability. I think that there needs to be serious look at. We've talked about this before, is how the private rented sector fits in. The fact of life is that while there is a good side to the private rented sector, there's a serious rumble that provide poor housing and yet continues to get paid large sums of private rent, the private rental online. So there are quite a number of issues, and also not least, which is my pet hate, is the way the figures are delivered on the social housing development programme and the differences between. And I see Mark just smiling there, he knows what I'm going to say, and that is the difference between completions and starts, and I think that muddies the water. So there is quite a lot of stuff there that we're not going to get dealt with today. The fact of life is that there are 3,000 plus people in my constituency who are on the waiting list, over 2,000 of them are in stress. All the hostels, and there are quite a lot of them in West Belfast, are chock-a-block, where people, when some of them get into near approaching 3 years in hostel, and there's less than 200 houses being built in that constituency this year. So there are serious problems and difficulties that we need to deal with. There are little relats coming in because people are not are not moving out of their houses. So I think what we do need to do, Chair, is to look at an overarching review on all aspects of housing and how we deal with it, because while there may be some good aspects of housing, there are some terrible things that need to be dealt with, not least in the private rented sector. But the other thing has been is that in the round housing associations, I know the Minister has said that he believed that housing associations have not got the capacity to take on additional things, but they tell a different story. It's trying to get at the truth somewhere in there that allows you to think. And the other thing that has been there for many years is the whole question of developers' contributions, and where I think we have lost hundreds and hundreds of units, what has just been put down to the economic climate, one reasons why they won't be brought in.
Okay. Chair, if I can just canter through some of those and then colleagues can join in. Developers' contributions, the Minister has decided to consult on developer contributions, but after the elections, so there will be a consultation paper will come out. There'll also be a consultation paper from DOE, so there'll be 2 consultation papers on developer contributions post the 22nd of May. Housing association capacity, yes, the Minister is on record, and I think operationally it's a concern that we have. 4 associations have built 75% plus of the programme. Mark's team and Beverly's team have been working very hard to increase capacity within the housing association movement, but we're also looking as part of our delivery strategy, and it's in the housing strategy, of alternatives, alternative provisions. So we're looking at what else might we consider in terms of payment of housing association grants. So are there others that we can pay grant to increase the provision of housing? In terms of design and build, it's a competitive process. It's been tested by Fold. It's been successful in one part of the city. We are going to have a launch in June, towards the end of June, where we're bringing developers in and housing associations to tell them about what has worked and to tell them about our plans and to try and garner more interest in this. But very much, Beverly's led on this, the focus has been on new build solutions. So we want developers to come to housing associations with land and with proposals for development. So the competition will be run for X number of houses in X area, and then those will be assessed, but it will be a competitive process rather than a starts and completions. I think is a very valid point. We do measure completions as part of our housing statistics, but we don't. The target is focused on starts, mostly because starts are more within our control than completions. But what we are trying to do, and Mark has introduced, a much more robust project management arrangement with housing associations, so we can push them to be at certain points throughout the development, so that developments, as far as possible, don't slip. There'll always be some slippage in capital programmes, but Mark's trying to get a tight rein on that. At some stage in the future, we may move to measuring completions rather than starts, but there aren't the mechanisms in place, we don't feel to allow that at this stage, but it's something that's continually on our radar. The role of the private rented sector, we acknowledge the point. The Minister has said that he wants to review the regulatory arrangements for the private rented sector, and we will be starting to do that later this year. And no doubt we'll have an opportunity to engage with members specifically on that. And on over 55s accommodation, just to come back to the point that Mr. Brady made as well, one of the things I suppose that we want to get right is we want to make sure that moving forward we have the right models for housing for over 55s, particularly those with special needs, dementia and so on. There are a number of really good examples in Northern Ireland, like Cedar Court, but there are also some examples that haven't worked, like Angara. So what we want to do and what we've been talking to OFM-DFM about is funding a piece of work which looks at what has worked well and what hasn't, and what are the models for moving forward. What kind of housing should we be building for over 55s? What are the blockages to it, and how do we do it better? So that's very much a piece of work which we're trying to get off the ground.
See, just sorry, there are many more good examples of over 55s in the thing.
Absolutely.
And they're owned by different housing associations. You know.
I'm just very conscious now we're about to lose a quorum, and I need a quorum for the next item because it's subordinate legislation. So in over about 2 or 3 minutes left, I think, for Stuart, before you need to go. I wanted to raise a question on paragraph 36, but I mean, I'll write till you. It's just about proposals that you're discussing around bringing in private developers or associations from Britain and so on, which all that would require consultation legislation. So where does that dovetail into the discussions around social housing reform programme? I would say that's part before the horse, perhaps. So I'll write to you if you have an extensive answer, just to get a...
And I suppose, Chair, what we'd say on that is that that's something that we've been tasked to do through the housing strategy, but in advance of that, and I suppose to inform that and to inform the capacity that we feel, or to provide us with an evidence of the capacity of our current housing associations, we're doing the design and build work and exploring the joint venture avenues, because while we have 4 of our housing associations deliver about 80% of the programme, the remaining housing associations are still delivering that 20 to 25% of the programme, which is a significant part. So we're looking to see how we can help them to develop more, and it may be that some of our smaller housing associations don't have the development capacity. So if they're working in partnership with the private sector to do the development, housing associations have a good track record of taking on and managing and maintaining stock. So through that, we may be able to improve the levels of stock we deliver and improve the capacity of housing associations.
Yeah, I'd also comment, I do think that housing associations in Northern Ireland recognise the need to increase their capacity, and certainly we have seen significant signs this year that the big associations are hoping to develop significantly more than they've developed in previous years. So I think that's positive that they at least recognise they need to step the game up to start delivering more than they have in previous years.
I just want to mention something in the hope and see it turn your eyes up. And again, you talked about developers sitting in land in the hope that the property will increase. There are vesting powers there that the housing executive have that haven't been used in years, and they seriously need to look at how you vest land where developers are sitting surplus land.
Okay, so that's a fair point, Fra. Just in the event of meeting the need of our security in particular. So, okay, so I mean, can I thank yourself, Stephen and Beverly and Mark, for your presentation this morning and the dealing with members' questions and so on. And obviously it's an ongoing issue, which I appreciate the work been done and some of the improvements that have been made in that regard. So we'll follow this up. Is that fair enough?
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Now, thanks for again. Moving members then swiftly on to the next item, which is proposed subordinate legislation. That's number 9 on the agenda, page 51 in your pack. Obviously, proposed regulation implement a number of consequential amendments. This is in respect of maternity allowance and so on. So are members content that they've read this and that it is content that the rule be made? Thank you, Brady.
Just, I mean, it talks about aligning this new group of women assisting maternity allowance provision for a reasonable period. Disqualifies a woman from receiving maternity allowance if she fails to attend medical examinations without due cause, which is open to speculation, or take due care of her health. What does that mean? You know, it just doesn't make sense.
Doesn't?
You know, and I would be asking the department to explain this kind of throwaway, nebulous.
So defer and invite the department to explain what they mean. Fair enough, all right. No, it's a fair point.
The nebulous kind
Very,
of.
how are you supposed to measure that? Okay, so we'll defer that item then, and then, well, we're still for it, and we'll invite the department to come and explain that. Okay, members, content then, item number 10 on correspondence, that's on page, the memo there is on page 58 of your pack. Members content to note the correspondence for them, as per the memo? Yeah, on the next item for work programme then, obviously, again, you have that on page 38 of your tabled items. Again, forward work programmes are always a movable feast and constantly being reassessed. Okay, so members content then, moving on to the next item, it's AOB. Anything to raise under AOB? If not, then the meeting stands adjourned to same time next week. Okay, members, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for your staff. Thank you.
29.